Cinderella managed to get to the ball in the palace thanks to the fairy godmother, but even happy moments come to an end. Cinderella left the palace as soon as the clock struck midnight, and in the minutes of her escape, she dropped her slipper. The venerable prince picked up the lost crystal slipper, after which he could not forget the beautiful girl, and then the young man, driven by longing for the stranger who had stolen his heart, set out on a journey full of hope and foreboding. After a long and exhausting search, he finally found the owner of the glass slipper. And after this happy meeting, Cinderella married the prince, and the happiest days of her life began. Her happy life should have been long, but according to the fairy tale fairy, Cinderella did not look like a happy lady at all. Most often, Cinderella was alone in a locked, cold room and shed bitter tears every night. At some point, the prince stopped looking for Cinderella. He locked her up like property in a cold cell, as if the girl was some kind of secret, and this certainly could not be called a happy life. Cinderella was more like a bird locked in a cage, because she failed to give birth to the heir her prince had been waiting for so long. After that, 10 long years passed, and their so-called long lasted only some 10 years. One day, Cinderella asked the fairy godmother what she should do, and if she had known then that only a fleeting moment awaited her, she would have turned their wedding into ruins. Now Cinderella was sure that even if she had to pay for it with her life, it was still too late. In Cinderella's room lived a little mouse, who was quite old and could no longer run and jump as before, let alone stand on 2 legs. Before her death, Cinderella decided to fulfill one of her wishes and ask the fairy godmother about it. Cinderella confessed that she had one last wish, and she really wanted the fairy godmother to help her fulfill it. That day, Cinderella wished for this little mouse to be happy again and dreamed that this child would smile happily again. Cinderella's wish was instantly fulfilled, and in an instant the old mouse was reborn into a mischievous little mouse. The little mouse once again had an owner who was incredibly happy to spend joyful moments with her little animal. This girl may have had nothing but a radiant smile, but just like then, the little mouse finally felt like she had a bright ray of light. Looking at the little mouse, the fairy asked again if this was really the girl's true wish. Cinderella could have wished for anything, but for some reason she asked for the little animal to be happy again. The fairy took the dying mouse in her hand and fulfilled Cinderella's wish at the end of her life, who decided to wish happiness to the child. A small mouse, with fur the color of field dust, sat on a huge petal of a yellow flower. The mouse felt like a tiny dot in this world of giants, timidly moving its paws over the soft, velvety pile of the petal. Cinderella dreamed that the little mouse would live a happy and joyful life with her new owner forever. The heroine wanted this child to be happy and live a long life, full of pleasant moments and memories. This was the last wish the fairy could grant Cinderella before her death. Looking at the little mouse, the fairy did not understand why Cinderella did not want to continue her life, even just once. But for some reason she was sure that if everything were so simple, she could easily do it, but definitely not in this life. Legend has it that Cinderella's curse could only be lifted by this child, to whom she wished a long and happy life. For she loved her with all her heart, and if ever this child smiled, perhaps she could smile back at him. Cinderella's last wish was exactly that, and she really didn't intend to wish for anything else. And in the little mouse's next life, Cinderella wished that the animal would live in a sunny place, enjoying every moment of its life. But most of all, she wanted the little mouse to never meet her again, to avoid a dark and tragic fate. The birds sang a melody woven from the morning dew and the first rays of the sun, their voices merging into a single choir, where every note, every trill, seemed to be filled with hidden meaning, understandable only to those who know how to listen with their hearts. The melody that the birds were singing was an old childhood song of the heroine, and the birds always sang it when she separated from them with food. In the heroine's life, everything was not as bad as it seemed, and the little mouse could not even imagine that paradise could be so beautiful. As soon as she had settled comfortably into one of her favorite yellow flowers, she heard loud voices calling for Cinderella. The girls shouted that Cinderella was a lazy slacker and had absolutely no idea what time it was. And the little mouse even thought that she was in hell, otherwise she would not have had to hear the creepy voice of her half-sisters. The heroine stroked the little mouse, and at that moment the little animal felt all the warmth and caring touch of her. The little animal felt like he really was in paradise, so sunny and bright, where he was cared for and loved. The kind, happy eyes of Cinderella who stroked the little animal expressed boundless love. The sisters continued to call Cinderella loudly, and she promised the little mouse that she would definitely return to her soon, once she had completed her work chores. The little mouse could not understand whether everything was happening in reality or in a dream, but she knew one thing, that she had a caring mistress. The little animal did not understand at all what was happening, and at one point he even stopped finding it funny, but now it was completely unimportant, because this was his dream. Cinderella's face and voice were incredibly bright and sunny, making one believe in a happy future life. The sisters angrily called Cinderella, and one of them was unhappy that the girl was taking too long to fulfill her request. Having come out to the sisters, the lady promised to clean up right away, and one of the sisters did not understand why there was such a noise, and since when this girl became Cinderella. The sister laughed and said that she became Cinderella because she was constantly dirty and covered in ash. The sisters continued to insult and humiliate the girl, but the heroine continued to remain submissive and calm. And even when her sisters called her such names, she never once responded with a rude word. The little animal wondered if this was really the work of a fairy, because the world in which the mouse woke up was really a separate place, and probably the fairy simply turned back time. And since this was a new reality, the little animal had a chance to protect Sarah and make her happy. The dining room was too noisy because the sisters continued to quarrel among themselves, and the little mouse heard a familiar voice. It was the voice of Count Bluewood. He was Sarah's biological father, but he never stood up for her, and it was the worst thing imaginable. After Cinderella married the prince, unlike her stepmother and stepsisters, the Count continued to cling to fame and one day paid for all his sins. Sarah lived well and tried, thanks to the budget allocated by the prince, but if it weren't for this greedy little man, the heroine would never have had to suffer so much. The sisters were constantly rude to the girl as soon as she appeared in their field of vision, and were sure that one should not contradict the sisters, and she was obliged to listen to them obediently. And the Count was always unhappy that he could have such a stupid and hopeless girl. But the heroine was still a child, and no matter how quickly she grew up and became an adult, Sarah was now just a young girl. That is why the young lady's happiness lay only in marriage, which could become her salvation, as if she had handed over her fate into the hands of the long-awaited prince. And in that case, no one except him could hurt this child anymore and treat her like a thing. Therefore, the little mouse no longer wanted to tolerate rudeness towards her mistress, and decided to sort things out on her own. The little animal rushed to run across the table, and even though she was just a mouse now, she really wanted to help her mistress. The little mouse was ready to do anything, even if death awaited her, so she ran across the table and rushed, clinging right to the Count's face. With her sharp teeth, she grabbed him right by the nose, promising herself that she would never forgive the Count for his rudeness towards his mistress. The Count screamed at the top of her lungs that a terrible, evil rat had attacked him right at the dinner table. If a person were bitten by such a small mouse, it would even be ticklish, but now the Count decided to become the king of real drama. He screamed in pain while the little animal hung on his face, clinging tightly with its sharp teeth, and the Countess asked the servants to immediately remove this abomination from her husband. When the heroine saw her little animal, she begged that it not be touched under any circumstances. The young men whom the Count ordered to immediately remove the rat headed in his direction, but the girl blocked their way and asked them not to harm the animal. She knew these people could be so cruel, planning to remove the animal herself right now. The little mouse heard her owner trying to stand up for her, and she understood perfectly well that she could get hurt if she tried to protect her. So when Cinderella blocked the path of the young men, one of them grabbed her tightly by the hand, shouting for her to go away slowly and not interfere. At that moment, the little mouse realized that her mistress might be in danger and detached herself from the hated Count's nose. And at the most opportune moment, the evil man took advantage of the opportunity, grabbing the little mouse that ended up in his strong hand. Holding the little animal in his hands, the man swung angrily, and he probably wanted to throw the mouse so that it would die as quickly as possible. The heroine only managed to see that her little animal had fallen right onto the floor, and the Count was shouting loudly for the servants to immediately remove the vile rat from the dining room. Seeing the motionless animal on the floor, Sarah was most afraid that the evil Count had managed to kill her. The mouse was lying on the floor, and she couldn't believe that this had actually happened on this ordinary day. The Count and his assistants were incredibly cruel, and Sarah only prayed that the little animal would survive. She asked the Count why he had acted so cruelly, but the man asked his hated daughter to shut her mouth, ordering her not to defend the rat, which had allegedly attacked him. The heroine begged to leave the little animal alone, because it was just a meadow mouse that lives in clean flower fields. And no one will ever be able to meet one like this in a mansion like this, because the little animal is not an evil rat at all. At that moment, the Countess angrily grabbed the girl by the hair so that Serafina would close her mouth as quickly as possible. The lady was indignant that the girl had definitely gone crazy, because she dared to hug such a dirty rat who definitely should not live in their luxurious mansion. The mother held the girl tightly by the hair, assuring her that her daughter had completely gone mad and dared to behave inappropriately. She threw her out of the dining room, asking her to leave immediately and never show her face again. As always, the Count and Countess rudely kicked their daughter out of the dining room, and the sisters did not even worry that the poor girl could be punished again. The Countess threw her daughter with all her might into one of the storage rooms, ordering her to sit there, count the grain, and think about her behavior. She ordered the girl not to leave here until she realized her actions and admitted her guilt. Sarah knocked on the door with her fragile fists, asking her mother to let her out, because she understood that she was completely innocent. But the Countess could not explain anything, and she treated her daughter as she saw fit, or rather, she simply used her. Sarah managed to take the little mouse in her palm and protect it. I understand that the little animal probably won't be able to recover without medicinal herbs to come to its senses again. She wanted to help her, but she couldn't even get out of the closet on her own, and shedding bitter tears over the little animal, she asked for forgiveness. Considering herself weak, the heroine apologized to the mouse, who was sure that it was he who ran out without thinking. What the little mouse was most worried about was that even in the past she couldn't console her mistress or wipe away her tears. She was just a useless mouse, and since then it seemed like nothing had changed. The little animal tried to squeak something, and the heroine smiled, because she understood that the pet was trying to comfort her. And even now, when everything turned out so terribly, her kindness was unchanged, and she always tried to save her. Sarah was sure that she and the little mouse could become great friends, helping each other in any trouble. Despite the girl's kindness and care, the little mouse still made her cry. But in that case, she did not understand why the fairy tale fairy brought her back, because she still could not do anything for her mistress. The heroine turned to the little mouse with great gratitude for what the pet had tried to do earlier. She laughed and admitted that it was actually incredibly cool because she had never seen her father scream so loudly. It was when the little mouse bit him on the nose that Sarah realized that the pet was trying to protect her from rough treatment. The little mouse was incredibly brave. Like the mouse from her favorite adventure story, the heroine realized that such a brave little mouse definitely needed a name. Holding the mouse in her hands, the heroine thought about what name to give it, and at that moment the name Elodie appeared in her head. The little mouse had been a dirty rat all his life, a disgusting rat, a miserable rat, always chased by people, and Sarah was the only person who once took care of the animal, giving it care and warmth. And her insignificant beeping, which in her opinion meant nothing, this sweet girl called worthy courage. So the little mouse didn't want to give up anymore and promised himself that he would protect the girl no matter what. And the next second, the little mouse turned into a little girl, and the heroine could not believe her eyes. After an unsuccessful breakfast, the Count waited for the doctor, afraid of catching some kind of infection from the rat. While he was standing near the window, something strange began to happen in the garden, and someone decided to enter the Count's garden. There was a loud noise below, and the Count did not understand what was happening here, but when he saw his beautiful garden, he was incredibly horrified. After all, some crazy person dared to destroy his magnificent garden, which cost the Count a lot of money. Apparently, uninvited guests had arrived at his palace, and the Count was very afraid for his safety. 2 guests appeared in the abandoned garden, and one of them was the Duke, who was known as the most terrible monster. The assistant informed the Count that Duke Valkyrieson and the young master had arrived, and the Count believed that these people lived among the non-humans, and for some reason constantly broke into his estate. The Duke and his grandson Edmund were waiting outside, eager to meet the owner of the mansion. The guests asked the Count to listen to them carefully, because the man must have been very surprised by their unexpected appearance. They assured that they had arrived unexpectedly for only one reason, which the Count probably needed to know as soon as possible. And at that moment, when the guests unexpectedly appeared in the mansion, the heroine could not believe what she had just seen, because it definitely could not have happened. The Duke's assistant stated that the Count had only 10 minutes to return the kidnapped beastman cub, and apparently the guests had in mind the little mouse, who had just turned into a cute young girl with furry ears. Edmund informed the Count that he was obliged to return the kidnapped child, and to do so as soon as possible. But these words seemed like complete nonsense to the Count, because he did not understand what kind of beastman was being talked about. The Count was outraged that the guests had destroyed his garden and were now talking nonsense, accusing him of kidnapping, bursting in here without any solid evidence. The Duke immediately asked Edmund's assistant to show the weighty evidence that the Count was shouting about so furiously. In the hands of the young man was a small round ball. It was an artifact that could track the location of the only daughter of the Ratson clan, the field mouse beastman. Until now, the young lady was considered missing due to a curse, and until that moment, her whereabouts were unknown. But just recently, the artifact suddenly activated itself and indicated where the kidnapped girl was right now. The guests insisted that she was right here, in the estate of Count Bluewood, who for some reason denied her existence. So Edmund declared that he was giving the Earl a final warning before they attempted to find the beastman on their own. If the Count continued to be stubborn and deny everything, the young men decided that in that case they would have to use magical power. The Duke had already drawn a magic circle near himself and asked what the Count was going to do next. The man saw that there was explosive magic located near the Duke, and these people were probably seriously planning to destroy his estate. The man was sure that the beastman could be present at the border, but not in the mansion in the center of the capital, and also the rat, which he hates the most. At that moment, he remembered his daughter's words, that she told him about a small field mouse that lived in a clean and flowery garden, suggesting that it could be the beastman. And at that moment, he realized that the rat that had attacked him this morning was that very same field mouse. The Count could not understand at all what was going on here, but he was absolutely sure that it was all about that hated rat. He asked the Duke and his assistant to wait, assuring him that there was definitely some misunderstanding. The estate was kept in perfect order, and even a common rat could not have settled here, and he would check this information right now. He turned to his assistant Alfred, asking where the very beast that had bitten him on the nose that morning was. And it must be that same field mouse that his daughter had so desperately defended this morning. The assistant remembered which rat he was talking about, because this morning the little animal had caused an incredible commotion in the dining room. He saw his daughter take the little mouse, clutching it tightly in her palms near her chest, when the Countess grabbed the girl by the hair. For the Count, this was simply excellent news. He asked his assistant to immediately check whether the mouse was still alive. And if the hated rat was still alive, he ordered to kill it right there on the spot, but the assistant was surprised because the guests needed a live mouse. The Duke was called the King of Beasts, and even if they had a peace treaty, humans and beastmen would never get along on the same planet, and the Count was absolutely sure of that. The home of Duke Valkyrison was the only place that maintained contact with the beastmen on the border, and if they came here because of one beastman, then it was not just a commoner. And what the Count was most worried about now was that if the little mouse told about what had happened this morning, it would be the end of them all. So he ordered that all traces of the beastman's appearance in his house be destroyed as quickly as possible. When the mouse opened her eyes, she saw her hands, small childish hands with plump fingers and soft skin. Elodie stood up cautiously, not yet accustomed to her new form. The world around her was so big, bright, and unfamiliar. Fear and curiosity fought inside her, but something told her that this was only the beginning of a new life full of wonders and adventures, and the little girl with ears, Elodie, took the first step towards the unknown. Sarah approached the little girl to see if she was okay and that she was definitely not hurt or broken. She softly brushed Elodie's cheeks, guessing that the little girl must have been terribly scared. Looking at the small, fluffy ears that were cutely sticking out from under the girl's hair, the heroine finally realized who she had turned into. The girl had a long mouse tail sticking out, and Sarah saw that in front of her was a real cute beastman. All her life, the little mouse had been just an ordinary mouse. There had never been anything human about her, and Elodie couldn't understand how this could happen. Sarah was sure that the books had said before that ordinary mice couldn't turn into people. But the beastmen can turn into an animal at any moment, and even in human form they retain their features. And since the little girl had furry ears on her head, Elodie was definitely a beastman, a field mouse, and it was just amazing. Elodie didn't believe that such magic could happen to her, and even suggested that it was all an amazing dream. And looking into the eyes of caring Sarah, she was very afraid that in one moment everything could just disappear. The heroine looked at the little girl, who suddenly turned out to be not a little field mouse, but a real person. Even if Elodie had a human mind, she still lived like a field mouse, and she probably had to endure terrible things that the heroine could not even imagine. The fact that she managed to keep her sanity was already a miracle, and Sarah hugged the girl carefully, insisting that everything was fine and they would definitely get out of here. She understood that the little girl was probably very scared and confused right now, but she promised to help her beloved friend. And at this good moment, to the horror of the heroine, the Count's assistant came out of the door and declared that the beastman was right there. Sarah understood that something terrible could await the girl, and she would not be able to do anything about it. Seeing Alfred's angry look, she realized that it was the Count who had ordered something terrible to be done. Trying to shield the frightened-eyed beastman with her body, Sarah asked why the Count's assistant had broken into the door. The assistant shouted for the knights to immediately catch and kill this beastman rat, because if they let it go, they would definitely be in trouble. It was necessary to save oneself, and Sarah shouted loudly for Elodie to run as fast as she could, and not to look back under any circumstances. Something strange was happening here, and the little girl did not understand how she could abandon Sarah and just run away. But if these people called her a rat, it meant that they were hunting her. In any case, now the little girl knew what it was like to be human. She didn't want to become a mouse again, but now she had to transform herself in order to slip through a small hole in the wall. The little mouse managed to hide and crawl through a crack in the wall, but the boys were going to break the wall, and Elodie felt that they wanted to kill her. Sarah screamed for the knights to stop breaking down the wall immediately, claiming that the mouse had long since escaped. But Elodie wasn't going to just die, and Sarah made it clear to her that in the future they would definitely be together and happy. So the little mouse ran with all her might, because she had no intention of dying right here today. Alfred realized that the werewolf had managed to escape and ordered the knights to kill the mouse immediately before anyone noticed them. Sarah continued to shout for the young men to stop immediately, but at that moment a young man's voice was heard in the room, wanting to know what the knights were doing here. He saw that the young man was trying to break down the wall, and Alfred was completely scared when he saw the young man. Because it was the young master Edmund Valkyriesen, and even just one look from this man sent shivers down my spine. The heroine knew that if this was him, then he was indefinitely friends with the beastman, and Alfred was scared because he certainly did not expect to see the master right here. Sarah realized that now was the right moment and decided to ask the young master for help. She did not wait for words from Alfred, but pitifully begged that the young man would be able to help her. The little mouse watched from behind the wall as Sarah insisted that these vile people wanted to kill her friend. And she had no other chance but to ask for help from the venerable gentleman, who would definitely be able to help her. With tears in her eyes, the heroine begged to save her friend, who was completely innocent. Alfred understood that if the young duke understood everything now, he would definitely have trouble, and big problems would also await the Count. He wanted to get rid of the hated rat as soon as possible before the young master managed to find it himself. Alfred shouted how the girl dared to speak first, since no one had given the floor. Right in front of her was the heir of a great family, and she was just a lowly girl who didn't even have the right to open her mouth. Alfred shouted that Sarah was just a dirty maid and had absolutely no right to express her opinion, assuring that the girl does not even deserve the most miserable life in a cold, empty attic with cobwebs and cockroaches. Sarah had no mother, and the Count never considered the girl as a member of his family, and she will never become part of the Bluewood Count family. The Countess also always treated the girl rudely, and called her a small and dirty girl who was only fit to wash floors. That's why Alfred always treated Sarah like a thing that was constantly getting in the way and underfoot. Sarah had spent her entire life trying to defend her honor and never considered herself an ordinary servant in this terrible family. But to her great regret, she lived her entire life seeing only the floor and was always treated as a vile servant who was not worthy of kindness. Now she had a little friend, and the heroine could not sit back and do nothing. The girl loudly declared that her name was Seraphina Bluewood and that she was the legitimate daughter of the Count's house. Alfred insisted that the girl had gone crazy and was talking nonsense about being the daughter of a noble family. He didn't understand why the lady suddenly started expressing her opinion, because she always remained silent no matter what they did. After all, he was sure that no one would believe an ungrateful servant, a dirty slob like her. While Alfred was trying to sort things out with the girl, the Duke approached him and declared that there had been enough rudeness for today. Alfred called Sarah an ordinary child of no birth, who was clearly not worthy of the attention of such a respectable gentleman. But the young man asked Alfred in a serious tone to immediately release the girl who had just expressed her opinion. He was not afraid to grab Alfred by the hands so that he would finally let go of the innocent girl. At last the lady's hands were free, while Alfred cried pitifully that the young man had treated him too rudely. When the heroine said her name, the Duke realized that he had never heard it before, and he also had not heard that there was another daughter in the Count's family. He chuckled, because the head of the family had never mentioned his third daughter before. Sarah was prepared for the fact that absolutely no one would believe her, but now she decided to ask the master for help. She asked to save her little friend who was hiding in the wall, and she didn't care at all what might happen to her in the future. According to Sarah, there was a field mouse hiding in the wall, a child who had just now learned how to change his appearance. Alfred shouted at the young Duke not to waste his time on the nonsense of an ignoble servant. But the young man knew that everything the girl had just said was not a lie, and it was the absolute truth. A small blue magic ball appeared in his hands, and Elodie looked at the unimaginable magic with great surprise. The Duke confirmed that the location shown by the magic ball exactly matched the location he was currently in. And this meant only one thing: the missing beast lady was in this room, which meant the ducal family was looking for little Elodie, and she was incredibly happy about it. Turning to the magic ball, the young man realized that it was pointing exactly to the place in the wall next to which he was located. Alfred realized that there was a small crack in the wall, and that was where that same rat had dared to escape. Without thinking, the young Duke picked up the tool that could break the wall. He asked everyone to step back, and Alfred realized that the young man was not going to listen to anyone. Despite his pleas from the young Duke to stop, the youth still approached the wall, despite the shouting assistant. He still thought that the issue could be resolved peacefully, but at that moment the Duke was already swinging a weapon at her to break down the wall. The concrete wall crumbled into pieces as soon as the young Duke used his magical power. He struck right at the small hole in the wall, right where the little mouse was hiding. The Duke managed to break through it. He was immediately happy, because he was sure that the beastman was definitely here. Just now, the young Duke destroyed the entire wall with just a fire axe, and even the little mouse was so scared that she froze in place. The Duke approached her with concern and asked her not to worry in any way, because she was now completely safe. He admitted that he came to save the little beast man, because he knew for sure that she was right here. The little mouse saw this man for the first time, and did not understand at all why he decided to save her. In an instant, the little mouse turned back into a girl, and Sarah asked for forgiveness for not being able to do anything when she was in danger. The little girl was worried that she was completely useless, and Sarah could even be beaten, but she still tried to help her. She didn't understand how brave it was to only intervene when there was no danger, but Sarah was braver than anyone. Sarah cried as she looked at the little girl Elodie, and she was just happy to be alive. The Duke carefully handed over his handkerchief because he saw that Sarah was crying and worried. And this kind gesture showed that there are kind people in this world who are always ready to help. The heroine was a little frightened, because the venerable gentleman himself had just offered her to take his handkerchief. She touched him gently, thanking the young man for such close attention. And now this handkerchief was really needed, because Sarah couldn't stop crying, looking at the saved girl. At this moment, Elodie noticed that the Duke showed great concern for her mistress. After all, right now he was clearly trying to flirt with Sarah, who, in her opinion, should belong only to her. The girl was simply embarrassed, so she did not hesitate to cry in front of a guy of her own age. And Elodie was grateful to the Duke for his help. She was sure that it was better for him to stay away. The Duke has already been met by the Count and Countess. I assure you that it is a great honor for them to receive such distinguished guests. The Countess smiled a false smile, assuring that if she had known about the visit in advance, we would have prepared a worthy reception for our daughter. But the Duke did not come for Soviet visits, and today he arrived to resolve an important issue. All this time I was thinking how much longer I could mess around with the pathetic rat, because it was time to report if they had let it go. Finally, the doors opened slightly. Probably one of the assistants came in. The Count was glad that now they would tell, and they had not managed to find any beastmen. The man looked at his assistants with a wary look and asked them to come in immediately, confident that they had finally finished off that hated rat. But to his great surprise, it was the Duke who announced that he had brought the missing Lady Ratson. The Count saw that it was not a servant who entered, but a young Duke, and next to him was his daughter with some child. And what he feared most was that the young Duke now knew that they had tried to kill this child. He wanted to deceive the Duke so that everything could still be fixed, and decided to play out a scene as if Sarah had saved the rat. He approached his daughter and said that he would reward her later, asking her to leave the girl and go to her room. But the heroine saw through the dirty plans, because the Count wanted to remove Sarah from the Duke's sight and intimidate her in order to hush up the story. And when he tried to take the beastman into his hands, who would have thought that something unexpected would happen? The little girl bit the Count's finger with all her might, because he considered her an ordinary child, and he was very wrong. The Count thought that he should have immediately finished off the hated rat, feeling severe pain from its bite. The Duke asked the Count if the man had just tried to kill the lady through the maid. The Count stated that he had given no such orders at all, and his wife had no idea what was going on. He was not even afraid to lie that everything that happened was an unauthorized action of his assistants. Probably the Count was going to fight until the very end, and even the Duke did not doubt him. But his grandson insisted that perhaps he had been brazenly slandered, but now he asked to look at something unusual. Thanks to the magic amulet, the Duke could show what had happened in this mansion earlier. Everyone heard Alfred's voice shouting that they should kill the beastman rat immediately. The Duke also showed that all the assistants saw how the little mouse managed to get through a crack in the wall. And at that moment, Alfred was shouting for the pathetic mouse to be finished off as quickly as possible before anyone discovered them. The Duke held in his hands a golden magic earring that allowed him to hear all conversations. And exactly the same earring was on the ear of the young Duke, who also managed to find out the whole truth. Probably the Count was going to deceive the Duke because he knew everything perfectly well from the very beginning. The Duke asked Sarah to come to him, but the little beastman was very afraid of the stranger. Sarah promised that the girl could trust the Duke. This man was absolutely safe. He picked up the girl and announced that the missing lady had just been found, but no one knew who he was talking to. The man had another magic earring, and he was probably talking to someone, saying that the girl was unharmed but was clearly in danger. The Duke was waiting for an order from some other people through a magic earring, while everyone remained completely unaware. There was some kind of interference in the earring. At one point, the man admitted that now everything was clear to him, and the culprit was expecting a new punishment. At this moment, the Count and his wife were seriously scared, not understanding what was going on here. The Duke warned the Count not to even think about running away because he would face complete failure. And as long as there are doors that see and hear, they will be able to find the Count and his wife wherever he may be. The Count's house was probably about to come to an end. The Countess tried to calm her husband down so that he would finally come to his senses. But the most important thing was already completed, and the little beastman sitting in the Duke's arms was completely safe. Edmund promised to take Lady Ratson to her estate, which the little girl had not even imagined. This meant that she had real parents and she would finally be able to see them. The young man said that all this time her parents had been looking for their daughter with all their hearts, all these long years. Not only did the baby turn out to be a beastman, but she was also the daughter of a noble family, which is why the Duke himself came to look for her. Everything was incredibly confusing, and the little girl wanted to see her parents, but she didn't remember her family at all. And besides, since the Duke came in person, it meant that she was a very important member of the family. She dreamed that when they returned with Sarah, she would dress her in the most beautiful, luxurious dresses. And he will also feed her incredible delicacies that the girl has never tried before. The little girl dreamed that they would lie on a soft and fluffy bed, and nothing terrible would happen in their life anymore. So she happily asked Sarah to come with her to finally meet her family. Sarah had never thought about it before, that one day she would be able to leave this terrible house. After all, she couldn't even imagine whether she could be happy if she went after her little friend now. There was one little ray of light in her life, and that was the little beastman. Therefore, the heroine decided that she wanted to be happy next to Elodie and meet her beloved family. And holding her little mouse in her arms, Sarah happily announced that she was going to go with her. Dreaming of a happy life with their little friend, the heroes arrived at the Ratson family estate. But no one said that this estate would be so small, because the little girl promised her friend a luxurious life. The estate turned out to be for little mice, and Sarah understood that they definitely could not live here happily, because she was even taller than this house. Elodie squealed that everything was lost because she couldn't even get into the castle, and was already silent about her desire to find happiness with her friend. The Duke approached the small mansion and admitted that he had come to visit His Holiness. While the dream of a happy life was crumbling before the eyes of the little mouse, the heroine asked if her parents were high priests. Elodie tried to come to her senses as quickly as possible, only now she began to understand where she was and who her family was. This world was divided into 2 continents, and one state was called Terra Nolia. Only people lived here. But there was also another state. It was called Animanolia, and only beastmen lived there. Between them were the lands of the Valkyrian family, so one could only get from one world to another by passing through the strictest control of the lands. This meant that the high priests of the mysterious land of the beastmen were the parents of little Elodie. Now the little heroine began to slowly remember her past life, and it was said that the daughter of the previous high priest had disappeared in childhood. In the world of beastmen, abilities were passed down exclusively through blood. Therefore, the post of high priest is always occupied by the clan with the strongest gift of healing. It turns out that when the baby was first reborn as a human, her wounds healed on their own, thanks to the magical gift of healing. The Mouse Knight informed the Duke that His Holiness was waiting for him in the audience hall. He turned to her mouse Elodie, politely asking her to climb onto his large palm. Elodie had already learned that the mansion belonged to her family, the field mice, not simple inhabitants of the fields, but priests of ancient powers. Elodie, a mouse with the soul of a human girl, always dreamed of a family, of the warmth of her home. The first meeting was exciting. The mice in velvet robes looked at Elodie with curiosity and wariness, but in their eyes she saw a spark, a glimmer of kinship. All her life the little heroine wanted to see her parents. Now that it happened, she was completely confused. She didn't even know how to look at them or where to start a conversation, because all her life she had been fighting for survival day after day. Dreaming about a family was an unaffordable luxury. Instead of thinking about her relatives, she had to look for food every day. So she lived for many years, and now she did not know how to accept her own family, the mice, whom she saw for the first time. The mother mouse hugged her beloved girl with all her care and admitted that her daughter had finally returned. Hugging the little mouse, she didn't even immediately believe that it was really her daughter in front of her, because they had been looking for her for many years. The baby has been missing since childhood, and her parents have already lost all hope of her reappearance. The parents were happy to see their daughter and asked for forgiveness because they were sure that they were to blame for her disappearance. Little Elodie felt the weight slowly lift from her soul, and such was the weight of the family, love and longing that could not be measured. But all this time, her parents believed that she would return one day, which meant that he finally had a real family. All this time she had parents who were worried about their little mouse, and she was not alone. But now she has found her home again, and has returned to the tiny mansion where her parents lived. The field mice cried bitterly, looking at their daughter, who assured them that everything had been fine with her all this time. She told about Sarah, who always saved her and was there in the most difficult times. The baby's father looked at the girl and asked if this was really the same Sarah, thanks to whom their little daughter lived happily. He ordered the knights to immediately prepare a feast in order to give the savior the most luxurious reception. The mouse knights worked quickly, and soon the heroine was sitting in front of the table. Sarah smiled and thanked him from the bottom of her heart, admitting that the dishes on the table were so elegant and charming. Mother Mouse asked her daughter to try a special dish that is very nutritious for wood mice. The high priest admitted that he had been too excited earlier and could not contain his emotions, but he really wanted to know if everything was okay with his daughter. He understood that the child might get confused in a new environment and first suggested that his daughter warm up with some delicious soup. The caring father offered his daughter to try different dishes, while the mother wanted to find out some details about her daughter. She heard from the Duke that a little mouse could turn into a human, and this was reliable information. Wanting to know how the field mouse managed to break the curse, Elodie realized that she had been cursed all along. It was said that there was a curse that once turned people into animals, and it was difficult to dispel even magically because it was incredibly strong. But somehow the little mouse managed to break the terrible curse, and only Sarah was nearby, who probably influenced this. Elodie didn't quite understand how it happened. Her parents wanted to know how their daughter managed it. Mother Mouse, with sadness in her eyes, said that her daughter really had a terrible curse on her. It could only be removed with a kiss filled with true love, and only then could the human form be restored. And once Elodie heard that it was all about true love, she finally understood the reason for lifting her curse. In 1 second, she managed to turn into a little girl, and she loudly called her friend by name. Wanting to find out if Sarah really loved her madly, it was only thanks to her that the curse was lifted. Sarah smiled and replied that of course she loved her little friend and fell in love with her at first sight. After all, no one can resist the kindness and radiance of little Elodie, and that is precisely what boundless love is. This little mouse was her angel, her salvation, her happiness, and she should have told him about her feelings long ago. The little girl ran up to her friend and declared that things definitely wouldn't go this way, and that everything had to turn out differently. That's why she confidently told her mom and dad that from now on, she wanted to live with Sarah in the human world. She asked their permission, and the surprised parents were sure that the little mouse would stay with them. The girl hugged her friend and asked permission from the mice's parents, who certainly did not expect such an outcome. Of course, she found a family that she never had, but her desire was simply her own happiness. One day, the girl made a promise and was going to keep it no matter what happened, so as to never see sadness in Sarah's eyes. And what she really wanted was to make Sarah happy for the rest of her human life. For her, happiness was precisely in this, so the little girl asked her parents for permission to live in the human world. The Supreme Mouse invited his daughter to live for some time in the ducal house of Valkyriesen. The mouse's father could not believe it because everything happened too quickly, but the mother understood her daughter's desire perfectly, and despite their strong desire to live with her, their daughter's happiness meant much more. To be honest, the Duke himself expected such an outcome, and the mouse's parents were worried about whether their daughter would cope in the human world. The Valkyriesen never refused those who came of their own free will and asked them for help. The baby's parents understood that she would be protected, and they were worried that no one would hurt her again. The Duke promised that her parents would not worry, although their faces showed that they were ready to die of anxiety right now. No one tried to restrain her powers, and even if the baby really was 5 years old, she would not have understood anything, but there was clearly something wrong here. Thanks to Sarah, her curse was lifted, but no one else in these lands was freed, not even mom and dad. Even high priests with high authority were forced to hide and release the child, who had been searched for so long. Probably they had their own reasons for this. In the eyes of the little girl, the picture gradually began to take shape, and she seemed to begin to understand the whole harsh reality. Her parents were ready to let her go, albeit with pain in their hearts, because they wanted to protect her from external threats. The evidence of this threat was undeniable. It lay in the future, which was already near. 10 years after the High Priest, it will not be the race of forest mice that will take over, but those that carry deadly poison, the race of basilisks. The little girl couldn't believe that everything that happened was just a coincidence. She had no idea how deeply connected the future she knew was, but now she was ready to leave her parents. Mother turned to Sarah, a human friend who came with her daughter and saved her. The Duke informed the lady that the little mouse wanted to know if she could call the girl by her name. Mother Mouse shyly thanked him for saving her daughter, looking at her with her tiny black eyes. She confessed that they were forever indebted to this girl, and the Duke had just translated the mouse language. And as soon as the lady heard about this, she turned to the little mouse, who admitted that most likely it was their daughter who always helped her. She apologized for arbitrarily calling the baby by the name Elodie, since it was she who gave her that nickname. But the mouse assured that everything was fine if her daughter preferred this name, and Sarah essentially gave her a new life. The little girl listened attentively to her mother's words, and her heart broke with every word. After all, her mother was sure that no matter what choice her daughter made, the main thing was that she was happy. But the fact that her parents were waiting for her all these years remains unchanged, because now the little girl had not only a good friend. The girl decided to ask what her real name was, because she really wanted to know the truth. Her parents named her Grace, and they spent a long time thinking about this name for their long-awaited child. The name Grace was incredibly beautiful, and when the little girl heard it, she felt warmth inside. Elodie, Grazia, both of these names were given to her by people she loved, so she was going to keep them carefully in her heart. Before saying goodbye to his daughter, her father asked his assistants to take out the precious box. The box contained a valuable sacred hammer, and only an heir with the rats and blood could become its owner. It was unlikely that such a small object could cause any damage, and the field mice's strength probably lay in their magical physical might. The little girl was surprised because could a valuable family heirloom really be handed over right now? Father admitted that you will have to pass the hammer on to her someday anyway, because who knows what might happen to them in the future. The most dangerous moment was that anyone could be hit with a small hammer, and after that the magical object would transport its owner to a safe place. The little girl thought that this hammer could only be used for teleportation, but her father said the following: that the magic hammer can only be used to escape from danger, and nothing else. This meant that the family heirloom had other functions, but it was used solely for security. Father said that life is predictable, and there may come a time when even here it will not be safe. So he asked the little girl to promise that in a dangerous moment she would simply run away and not risk her life. It's good that the girl didn't ask him about the curse, and looking at the caring family, she promised to do just that. After all, if the family had found out about her future plans, they would have done everything to protect their daughter from potential danger. So now, the only right decision was to leave, and let no one guess that the girl was going to dig in this direction. The farewell to the family was incredibly sad, and the high priest asked the Duke to protect his daughter. They also asked to take care of their girl so that she could live a completely happy life. It was incredibly difficult for Elodie to say goodbye to her parents, but she knew it would be best for everyone. The carriage set off along quiet, cozy streets where only beastmen lived, far from people. Looking out the window, the little girl admired the beautiful Valkyriesen with admiration and felt that from this moment her new, happy life began. The streets were spacious, locals were walking around, and what was suspicious was that the town itself was clean and quiet. The beastmen lived in peace and harmony, and most had animal horns, ears, and tails. Next to the girl with ram's horns stood a young man with a wolf's tail and furry ears. They behaved as if there was nothing strange in their appearance. The Duke asked the little girl not to worry, because what she was thinking about would definitely never happen here. But the girl was surprised that people like her with animal ears and tails lived peacefully in this small town. The ducal castle of Valkyriesen was even larger than the local market, and the little girl was very surprised when Edmund told her about it. The castle was the most peaceful place, so everyone was sure that the baby would be comfortable there. And in fact, the girl was simply bursting with impatience to see her new home as soon as possible. As soon as the heroes arrived at the duchy, the room for the young lady would already be prepared, and the girl admiringly admitted that she wanted to see the castle as soon as possible. Soon they arrived at a huge mansion, Valkyriesen Castle, and it was truly an amazing place. As soon as the girl got out of the carriage, the palace servants noticed her because she was the same missing lady. Everyone looked closely at the little girl. She was very afraid of such unexpected attention. But now she only heard how sweet and beautiful and simply charming she was. Frightened by such attention, the little girl felt uncomfortable, and her friend immediately noticed it. She was just still afraid of attracting people's attention, because before everyone chased her away, calling her a terrible rat. In her past life, she wasn't happy when people noticed her, but now she knew she wasn't just an ordinary mouse, but there was no way to erase those horrible memories. She didn't want to disturb Sarah with these worries while her friend was trying to calm her down. The Duke asked Sir Golf to come out, and he turned out to be a young man with wolf ears and a bushy tail. As cute as the little girl was, he said it was too impolite to stare at her like that. The young man was indignant because these words were addressed to him, despite the fact that all the servants were looking intently at the girl. Edmund noticed the sternest expression on his face and said that such a look could frighten the child. He should be more careful. The young man asked everyone from the Silver Order to disperse immediately and not to crowd around the little girl in the future. The leopard came to the rescue, asking the young gentleman to allow him to take responsibility for the safety of the young lady. After all, he considered himself much more handsome than the young men with wolf ears, but Edmund asked him to stop talking nonsense. He warned that the beastmen of the feline and canine families were currently forbidden from approaching the new guest. This order applied to all cats and dogs, because the young man was sure that they could frighten the little lady. He probably just wanted to take care of the girl, but the servants were sure that the master was too harsh. The Duke stroked the girl's head and said that it was time for them to look at the new estate, as well as the new beautiful room where the little girl would live. The Duke truly breathed freedom and treated his servants with great respect. At first glance, it seemed that everything here was subject to a strict system, but people and beastmen could communicate with each other calmly, without a shadow of tension. For the girl, it was a new happy world where she could finally feel free. After all, according to the accepted rules, people and beastmen lived on this land completely without hostility. And the main figure of this era was Duke Valkyriesen himself, who managed to reconcile the warring nations. But the little girl knew that soon this world would collapse, and a terrible tragedy would occur that would forever change the peaceful, calm life in the duchy. In the future, she remembered, in just 5 years, the Duke, who was the symbol of this peace, would disappear forever. The man will die, and after his mysterious death from cardiac arrest, petty quarrels will begin between the humans and the beastmen. The rift between the races will only deepen, the peace treaty will be broken, and rivers of blood will be shed. Eventually, a real battle will begin, and Edmund will silently defend the territory. But one day he will die, and after his death, both continents, which seem to have been waiting for this moment, will simultaneously declare a truce. And the ducal family will be accused and wiped off the face of the earth forever, but years later the slander about the instigator will be dispelled. By that time the world will have disappeared, the gap between humans and beastmen will become insurmountable. Edmund will ultimately fail to protect anyone, despite his enormous efforts. So if the little girl knew the future, she wanted to change something, and considering that she was just a little field mouse, she would want to repay with kindness at least these two who helped her. The girl suddenly declared that she would like the Duke and his family to live happily ever after. The Duke didn't even realize that the little girl was addressing him specifically because her words sounded strange. She even offered to check the Duke's health since she was, after all, a daughter of the House of Ratson, even though she was very young. And my father always said that there is no disease that cannot be cured, wounds, insomnia, and even mental trauma, everything can be treated. True, everyone has their limits, but the little girl was going to master the power of their family's sacred hammer. But suddenly the Duke declared that he did not need help at all. He had no health problems. He was sure that he knew his body better than anyone else, but unfortunately he was not aware of his imminent tragic death. The Duke recalled that her father had told his daughter to use the relic only in extreme cases, something she had probably already forgotten. The man insisted that the sacred hammer was not a toy at all, and if the lady played with it, her father would find out about everything. Edmund smiled and told the Duke that it was not like that at all, and the little lady just wanted to play doctor. The man decided to allow the girl once, but asked her not to worry about his health, since the court doctors predicted that he would live another 50 years. Elodie knew the Duke was going to have a heart attack, and she immediately thought that he probably had some kind of chronic illness. But it turns out that this is not the case, and perhaps someone will arrange his death in such cases. Something is usually mixed into the food. This meant that from now on, all food had to be carefully checked, and this was the best thing the young lady could do now. Now that she was in Valkyriesen, she couldn't just stand by and watch the Duke die, and she was determined to make sure the past didn't happen again. When she finally walked into her new nursery, her mouth dropped open in surprise. This room was incredibly huge, belonged only to her, and for the first time in her life, the girl had her own home. She was at a loss as to what to do in such a huge room and decided to train her body to protect her friend and overcome her fear of a new life. After all, she was still madly afraid of other people's attention, but suddenly she heard footsteps near her room. The head maid arrived to see her and promised to take care of the young lady from now on. Out of habit, the little girl got scared and hid under the headboard of the bed, from where only her legs and long tail stuck out. The maid was puzzled as to how the girl had managed to get into such a place, but she had to lie that she had simply seen something under the bed. In fact, the maid had scared her incredibly, and the lady had only come to help the girl change her clothes. The baby's suit looked tight, and she had been wearing it all day, but these were the clothes she had been wearing before the curse, and 2 years had passed since then, and they were too small for her. Lady Squirrel had prepared the clothes and offered to look at the new dresses, but after 2 years of living as a mouse, it was difficult for her to feel any feelings about clothes. The maid asked if the little girl had any preferences in design or color, and they were happy to fulfill them. The girl didn't really care about design and color because clothes hardly fed her. The maids brought in many boxes, and all the clothes were intended for the young lady, and the outfits for Lady Bluewood were downstairs. She took out one of the dresses that was intended for a girl, but suddenly the little girl said that she needed the blue color. After all, her friend Sarah simply adores blue, and she will definitely like a turquoise dress. She also knew that Sarah liked gold, but she was completely unaware of her favorite color. She began to look through the boxes and choose an outfit for her friend, and in one box there was a necklace that she thought was perfect. But be that as it may, the maid said that the little girl needed to choose something for herself. The young miss first of all wanted to pick out a new outfit for her friend, and she happily brought out the blue box. She wanted to see Sarah try on the new dress and was happy to come and hand it over to the girl. Opening the box, Sarah was surprised because the little girl managed to choose exactly what she liked. Of course, the young miss could list hundreds of things that would suit her friend's taste, and she picked out an amazingly beautiful dress. It was a light sky blue dress that matched Sarah's eyes incredibly. The lady really did look like an angel, and there was even a magical glow coming from her, and this dress suited her incredibly. Sarah thanked the baby for her pleasant care and was just picking out outfits that would suit her well. From pajamas to weekend wear, the kids' clothes looked so expensive and cute. It turns out that the lady had been picking things out for the little miss all this time and hadn't even looked at a small part of it. But she carefully picked out clothes for the girl because others also helped her with this. Ever since Elodie became human again, Sarah had always dreamed of doing something like this for her. The little girl didn't expect Sarah to do the same thing as she did, and the girl really hoped that her friend would like the outfit. Sarah always took care of the little mouse, and since she picked out a new dress for her herself, everything she chose turned out to be incredibly cute. Sarah picked out a beautiful coffee-colored checkered dress, and as soon as the little girl tried it on, she was overjoyed. After looking at the new dress, she realized that it seemed she would now love it all her life. Wanting to see Sarah in her new dress as soon as possible, she asked her to try it on quickly. While Sarah was getting ready to take a bath and change into a new dress, Mustard suggested that the little girl look around the estate. She carefully extended her hand to the girl, and together they went to inspect the property. The maid and the baby went into the building where the Duke himself most often spent his time, and this building was simply enormous. She warned that the young lady would hardly have to come here often, since the Duke mainly did his work here. Just at that moment, the Duke was walking with his assistant, who was supposed to clarify a certain issue and report separately on its decision. The maid greeted his lordship, and the little girl was surprised that his assistant looked even more stern than the Duke himself. The maid said that she was accompanying the young lady and showing her the estate, her new and cozy home. But suddenly the Duke declared that since they had all met, they should sort out some things. The little girl was afraid that it was she who needed to be dealt with, and she even closed her eyes when she heard these words. The Duke carefully placed the girl on his shoulder and said that just recently she wanted to play doctor. But he admitted that he was very busy now, and with such short legs, she wouldn't even make it to his office by sunset. So he put her on his shoulder, but the little girl was puzzled as to why her legs were called short. And even the joke about her not getting to his office by sunset had left her with conflicting feelings. But she definitely remembered them. They entered the Duke's luxurious office, and the little girl settled comfortably on the soft sofa. The Duke said that he works here constantly and has almost no free time. Elodie didn't understand because the Duke had invited her to play, but there were only documents lying around, and it was probably no place for children. The Duke insisted that observation was the basis of a doctor's work and asked the little girl to sit and watch from the side. And if she suddenly got bored, he could call the maid. The Duke's mind was definitely only on work, and he knew absolutely nothing about playing the doctor. Seeing that the Duke was constantly working, the little girl suggested that his heart attack could have happened due to overwork. But she couldn't even take on his work, and had absolutely no idea how to help him. The maid entered the Duke's office and brought delicious tea, and the little girl immediately recognized the smell that emanated from it. These were rare Cinderella tea leaves, which had an invigorating and tonic effect. But drinking such a tonic tea often is harmful, and although if you work at such a pace, the Duke had absolutely no other choice. The little girl understood that she needed to wean her off this tea as soon as possible. She saw that the maid had added powder from the herbs of the kingdom of Belma to the drink. And seeing this, the girl finally understood the reason for the Duke's poor health. If you mix the powder and tea leaves, you get a deadly poison that paralyzes a person's nerves. The girl decided that she needed to intervene immediately and ran up to the table with loud screams so that the Duke would not drink this tea under any circumstances. But she fell right in front of the Duke's table, and everyone was afraid that the little girl might get hurt or hit herself hard. Elodie fell and hit her nose right on the floor and immediately began to cry right in front of the Duke's table. The man immediately picked her up so that the baby wouldn't cry, and he realized that he needed to keep an eye on her. He asked her to explain what had happened, whether it was really part of her interesting and exciting game. The little lady declared that under no circumstances should the tea from Sindor be mixed with the herbs of the kingdom of Belma. It will only become fashionable in 5 years, but if you mix tea leaves with herbs, you can get a stronger, invigorating effect, but only in certain proportions. This combination paralyzes the nerves, deprives not only the sense of touch, but also the ability to feel pain, and 6 months after the boom in popularity, the nobles complained, but they are reversible consequences. This was especially disastrous for knights like the Duke, for whom sensitivity was vital. The Duke was surprised because he had been mixing herbs for a long time and nothing like this had happened, but if this was confirmed information from the girl's father, then the matter was serious. The maid fell to her knees and said she knew nothing about it, as she had been told it was a popular way to perk up and maintain productivity. The maid did as she was advised, but the Duke knew absolutely nothing about it. But now the little girl had revealed to him the whole truth about the desperate leaves and herbs, and he definitely had to pay attention to it. It seemed that the maid was not lying at all, and this could be determined simply by her look. The herbs of the kingdom of Belma were introduced only recently. They can't be so popular now, which means that someone definitely suggested it to her. So the Duke tried to find out who had previously reported this combination of herbs, as well as their great benefits. As it turned out, the Earl of Hamilton was to blame for everything. It was he who suggested that the maid use such a mixture of herbs. The Duke was furious because he could not even imagine that a tea drink could have an adverse effect on his health. He immediately called an assistant, who reported that the herbs from the cataract were indeed supplied by the Earl of Hamilton himself. After this information, the Duke's face changed dramatically, and the little girl could not help but notice his play with my gaze. The man threateningly asked that the Count himself be brought to him as soon as possible in order to sort this out personally and find out the details. The Count was soon brought in, but he insisted that some absurd mistake must have occurred and that he was completely innocent. He insisted that he had no idea how mixing tea leaves and herbs could make them a neurotoxin. The Count asked the Duke to give him a chance to find the culprit, but the assistant said that his words would be enough. And now they have received information right down to the composition of the herbs, the time and methods of acquiring them. The assistant assured that all the circumstances had long been subject to change, and the Count really did have serious problems. And everyone was sure that the Duke would definitely not have given such an order without any reason if the Count had really been innocent. The young man shouted that the Duke was an enemy of the people and could not destroy him, suggesting that the man go straight to hell. The assistant reported that the doctor told about a method that was previously unknown to anyone. It was very difficult to do because the small difference in the proportions of the infection was very different, but if you mix everything in a certain ratio, as the little girl said, you get a neurotoxin. And apparently the game was just waiting for the man to feel bad from drinking this tea. If the Duke had continued to drink this tea, he would soon have become paralyzed. No one would doubt that the problem lay in the mixing of herbs. This year, the Count turned 24, and the Duke could not believe that at such a young age he had decided to install him. They first met when the man was taking down the slave trading guild his parents ran, and it seems like it was yesterday. At that time, the still very young Count called the Duke an enemy of the family. Then he thought that this was natural, because he was only 14 years old. The young man lost his parents, his property, and all he had left was his family line. So the Duke took responsibility and kept the boy by his side until he cleared the family karma and fulfilled his share. But the result that the young master presented to him exceeded all his expectations because he wanted to kill him. Until now, the Duke had carried out his duties responsibly and given the Count everything he needed to live a happy life. But now, the time had come to take responsibility for his actions, and the Duke was confident that he was doing the right thing. He stated that the culprit would certainly be punished, but he did not want this man to be hurt. The Duke was incredibly upset, but he didn't show what was on his mind, that everything was fine and it just happened. Now he had a more important question, and the man was curious about how the little girl found out about everything. Perhaps since she is from the Ratson clan, the girl received a revelation from the Almighty, and there was no other way to explain everything that was happening. But the Duke decided not to make anything up and to ask the little girl about it personally, since she had saved him from death. The little girl waited patiently for the Duke in his office, and when he returned, there was a kind smile on his face. The man asked her how she knew he was eating spoiled food, and in her role as a doctor, she was very attentive. As the young lady thought, she acted as if she knew too much and was now trying to come up with an excuse. But the clumsy lie was now exposed, and if she did not want to end up like Hamilton, she had to convince the Duke properly of her truth. The girl said that she once ate a lot of the same thing, but something strange happened to her. When she was a field mouse, she got a little sick because she was so hungry and had no choice but to eat something. It was then that she learned that you need to be careful with any food because you can eat something poisoned and simply die. Before meeting Gray, the little field mouse felt a deep sense of hunger and despair. In a situation where it was difficult to take care of even one's own body, one day a house mouse extended a helping paw to her. She managed to find out everything only thanks to this cute little mouse who saved her from unexpected death. The new friend told how to find edible food, how to avoid people, and that even an ordinary mouse can have fun and enjoy life. She taught him to enjoy the drops of morning dew, and this mouse became a real benefactor for Elodie. She suddenly died after eating rat poison thrown to her by people, and her death was very painful. Living for 2 years at best, she could not live even that, never enjoying her short, happy life. So, using her role as a doctor as an excuse, the young lady checked his lordship's food because there was nothing else she could do. It may have been too late to be greedy now, but the girl admitted that she didn't want to see anyone die again. And now this concerned the Duke, whose life was in danger, but he had not suspected this at all before. Remembering the death of that mouse, the girl cried, and the Duke wondered what to do now. He asked the little girl to stop crying, because there was no longer any need to stir up painful memories, and now everything would be fine with the girl. The little girl didn't think she would cry so much, but she unconsciously remembered the past tragedy and the death of the little mouse, and so she became emotional. After all, Hamilton was just a small fish too, and the Duke would not allow such a guy to come to harm simply because he let his guard down. The little girl was glad that the Duke listened to her, but for some reason he remained unperturbed, as if he was used to threats. It seemed he hadn't even thought about herbs, but it wasn't the first time he had faced a threat, because there was clearly something else that could lead to his death. But today the little girl managed to reveal the whole truth, and the Duke realized how important this girl was in his life. When the young lady called the Duke, Your Grace, he looked at her with a surprised look. And suddenly he suggested calling him simply grandfather, without any official titles or addresses. The little girl was surprised, because this gesture was kind, and she had never called anyone grandpa before. As a joke, the Duke pointed his index finger up and belligerently declared that from now on the little girl should call him grandfather and nothing else. He said that he had to pay back the lady doctor, and he also had one interesting request. The Duke made it clear that he wanted to repay the favor, but for some reason they went to the kitchen, and the little girl was surprised. After all, she was sure that the Duke certainly did not repay kindness with hostility, but the kitchen frightened her incredibly. This kitchen was much larger and more magnificent than the others, and the Duke warned that the girl could play doctor here. But she was afraid that the cooks would see her and try to drive her away, because when she was a little field mouse, she was only driven out of the kitchen. She was afraid that everyone still considered her unclean and had been avoiding her since she arrived, so she wanted to leave the kitchen as quickly as possible before she was kicked out. The Duke understood that the girl was simply scared in the new conditions, and he understood this from her frightened look. As the young lady wanted to leave the kitchen as soon as possible, the Duke asked her if she was going to spend her whole life hiding in corners. He brought her here for a reason and guessed that the little girl was simply terrified of the kitchen. The young lady understood that she needed to speak up so that she could be released, but for some reason she was completely unable to even reveal her lineage or utter a word. But in her memory, only sharp knife blades flashed, and terrible incidents when a small mouse was menacingly chased throughout the kitchen. Still, the young lady was frightened by the face of the chef, who was holding a huge, sharp knife in his hands. Apparently, the chef with horns looked menacing enough that one of his colleagues asked him to at least put on a mask or go around the corner for a bit. The cooks greeted the young lady with respect, and everyone waited for the day when they would finally be able to see her in person. And this was not at all the reaction that Little Miss expected, because she was sure that everyone hated her. As grandfather had said, no one approached her because they were afraid of frightening her, and the Duke had warned everyone about this. His words were true, and she couldn't run away forever, because that was why she left her parents and came here. And if the young lady cannot overcome her fear, she will never be able to lift the curse from her family. That is why it was now necessary to make friends with the inhabitants of the duchy, who incredibly respected and loved her. The caring lady cook with ears smiled and asked if the young miss would like to try some delicious cookies. The cook's hands were simply terrifying when the girl touched them, but they were also surprisingly incredibly warm. The little girl modestly admitted that she came to check her grandfather's food to make sure it was completely safe. The cook saw the young lady as an incredibly sweet person and even offered to try to create a new menu for the Duke. They treated her like a child, but the young miss knew that it would be presumptuous to ignore her. All her life she had been a little field mouse, but she knew that she was not an ordinary mouse at all, but an elite one, so to speak. The young lady was given a piece of paper to try out when making a new menu, and it was the first time the little girl had written and used such a tool. Looking at the new menu, the Duke decided to put spelling aside and realized that first the girl needed to be taught to at least hold a pen. Elodie previously said that to live a long life, you need to eat right, but when she was a mouse, she only ate certain foods and lived. And it looks like it wasn't the Duke who needed a new diet, but this sweet little girl, considering what she wrote on the menu. The menu, compiled by Elodie, would be perfect food for a field mouse, but the chef said there are many more delicious dishes in the world. And if the young miss didn't mind, the lady offered to bring her a nut pie with almond milk, and the girl had never heard of such products before. For her, almond milk was a strange product, because it was the same as eating walnuts, almonds, and wheat at once. But as soon as she tasted the aromatic almond pie, she realized that these were completely different things, and that for the first time in her life she had eaten such delicious food. The pie turned out to be crispy on the outside and melted the moment it touched the tongue, and the cooks realized that the young miss liked the new treat. The Duke noticed that the little girl really liked the almond pie, and she happily offered him a taste. After all, this treat turned out to be incredibly delicious, and she wanted to share the joy with her grandfather. The Duke took a bite of the fragrant almond pie, and he could not refuse this sweet girl. It tasted like walnut pie, but the Duke's reaction was completely different from the young lady's. Even though he was a knight, he was still born a nobleman, and he must have eaten such food countless times. And if the little girl could find out the food that her grandfather liked, she would probably be able to find out the reason for his death, because he also liked to drink that tea. So she decided to find out from the Duke what food he liked the most in order to avoid a terrible tragedy. But the man unexpectedly replied that he had absolutely no favorite dishes, and the young miss could not believe that he really did not like anything. She suggested that what is more important about favorite things is not the thing itself, but the meaning that is embedded in it. Giving an example of a situation where she, who was not interested in clothes, began to like the clothes that Sarah picked out. And when the girl tried a delicious piece of pie, the first thing she thought about was that Sarah would also try it and admire it. Sarah always dreamed of Elodie eating with her too, but at that time she couldn't eat human food but really wanted to try. When you share, this moment is small but incredibly happy because it contains this most precious meaning. And the little girl tried to find out from her grandfather whether he really had anything like you that would bring him joy and happiness. The Duke thought for a while, but no matter how much he thought, he could not find a suitable answer. He just sweetly pinched Elodie's cheek, who asked him with all her might to think about it and answer her question. He allowed the girl to eat whatever she wanted in the kitchen and said that they had played enough for today. The young lady was allowed to do whatever she wanted, but the Duke warned her that there was one place she should not go to. The Duke warned the girl not to enter Serenity's courtyard, as it could be too dangerous for her there. The young lady felt only peace and tranquility from this name, but she had no idea what danger might lurk there. She asked why she couldn't appear there, but the Duke only dryly replied that it would be better for her that way. This topic was probably too sensitive for the Duke, so he did not want to go into details. Serenity had a grandson living in her yard, and she couldn't understand why he could be a danger to her. This grandson certainly could not have been Edmund and was probably one of the two remaining. Duke Valkyriesen had 3 grandsons, the first being Edmund, who would lead the duchy after him. The second grandson, Zenobia, was known for his bitchiness and dissolute lifestyle, and there was too little information about the third grandson because he had been dead for a long time. He died at an early age, unable to overcome a congenital disease, and his name was Lord Karen. The little girl understood that her third grandson was still weak in body due to a chronic illness, and he certainly could not become a danger to her. After a delicious lunch, the girl and her maid went to the Duke's garden, and looking at the huge, fragrant flowers, the girl was touched with delight. Lately, she had been living only in the room with Lady Grey, and the maid was sure that the little girl should feel good, showering with fresh air. It was the first time she felt so comfortable with Sarah, and the first week of life in the Duke's house flew by. But the young lady understood that now she could not spend all her time in such a relaxed state, and she needed to solve important issues. In addition, it was necessary to find a clue about her kind as soon as possible, but suddenly she looked at the bushes and saw a real snake for the first time. The girl got scared and asked the maid why there was a snake living inside the mansion, which scared her to death. She pointed to the bushes, next to which she had just clearly seen a real, huge snake. The maid said that because the garden is so huge and there are so many plants, sometimes real snakes appear here. The little girl's greatest fear was that it might be a basilisk, and if you think about it, her grandfather was also at risk of being poisoned within the mansion. So she wanted to find out everything from the maid and asked if it was true that snake people also lived in this area. There was a genus of boas and a genus of king snakes, but the little girl also knew of a genus of basilisks, which was the most dangerous. The maid was surprised that the young miss knew about this family, and earlier she said that she had lived on the street all her time. In the future, her family would be pushed aside. They would become the family of the high priest, but she couldn't help but know that she just heard it somewhere. There was no basilisk family in the Valkyriesen territory, and the maid was completely sure of it. However, snakes of the basilisk genus usually never leave their territory, and besides, this genus is extremely closed. They say that they only go beyond their territories when someone asks them to. Basilisks were not killers, and it turns out that without coming to them in person, it is completely impossible to meet them. Even so, she couldn't directly enter the snake's lair, so the little girl would like to get even more information. The young miss noticed a scattering of blue flowers. They resembled fragments of heavenly azure that had fallen to the ground, and Elodie froze, enchanted by their unearthly beauty. Elodie crouched down to take a closer look, and at the center of each flower was a tiny golden sparkle, as if they contained a small sun. The maid was afraid that the girl would get her clothes dirty while sitting in the grass, but the little girl just happily asked the squaw to take a look. She held in her hands a flower that was used as medicine, and she knew that this flower was called lobelia. The little girl said that lobelia flowers are used for detoxification, and this was its healing effect. This was taught to her by a mouse she had known before, and the young lady carefully preserved these memories in her memory. She also knew that this plant was especially helpful for snake bites, but the next moment another hero joined her. When the maid saw him, there was genuine fear in her eyes, but in front of them stood only a boy with coal-black hair and bright red eyes. For some reason, the maid was very worried and asked the young lady to pay attention to her. But Elodie was mesmerized by the child who seemed to appear out of nowhere right in front of them. Looking at the boy, she seemed to feel as if this person was already familiar to her, but this definitely could not happen. The maid screamed for the lady to come to her as quickly as possible, but Elodie was not afraid of him at all. She hugged the girl and asked what brought the young gentleman here, since he was not supposed to be here. The maid said that the boy should return to the palace as soon as possible, and it was the young Master Karen. For some reason, the maid tried her best to hide the girl, but she did not understand how she could be in danger. If we say that she called the boy Karen, it was definitely the third grandson, and given the development of the plot of the novel, he was still alive. And probably the very dangerous grandson that the lady should be wary of is this very boy. If he said that the third grandson was weak in body because of his illness, but for some reason the boy looked quite healthy. This meeting was too unexpected, and Elodie felt that she was very scared. But the boy just stood there, fascinated by the maid and the young lady he was seeing for the first time in his life. For some reason, everyone was incredibly afraid of this boy, but so far the little girl could not understand the reason for everything that was happening. If he is so sick that he can leave this world at a young age, then his illness could indeed be terrible. Judging by the fact that everyone avoided him, it is possible that his illness was contagious, but it does not seem to be a reaction stemming from fear that the illness could be transmitted. The little girl clearly felt the fear of prey standing in front of the predator because the maid's heart was now pounding wildly. The boy turned around, and the lady sighed with great relief as soon as he stopped looking at them. The little girl looked closely at the frightened eyes of the maid and asked her to calm down, because nothing dangerous would happen. And since the young miss herself wanted to find out the essence of everything that was happening, she ran towards the boy while the maid tried to stop her. Grandpa definitely spoke of danger, but people who want to harm small living creatures have a more terrible look than that boy's look. And at least it seems that the Third Lord is not the kind of person who can harm her. The young lady took the bouquet in her hands and shouted to the young lord to pay attention to her. Holding a beautiful bouquet in her hands, she asked him to take his healing herbs, saying that there were snakes here, and if he was bitten, he needed to crush the herbs and apply them to the wound. The boy probably didn't expect anyone to talk to him, and it was simply difficult for him to approach a stranger. So the young lady offered the bouquet, claiming that being bitten by a snake was very dangerous and the boy should take it. The girl joyfully shouted for the young lord to be sure to take the bouquet, while the maid called her back. The boy immediately realized that this child was the only one left from the Ratson family, and since it was noisy in the mansion, he went out for a short while. He did not expect to run into her. He approached the bouquet lying on the ground, and the jewel of the continent was an unimaginable miracle for him. The young lord's little soul was full of doubts and torments, but these little blue flowers made him feel something. Looking at the bouquet, he understood that there was no meaning in it anyway, just like in his life in general. The young lord was taught not to hope in vain, because his fate had long been predetermined, and no small bouquet could help him rejoice. After meeting the young master, Elodie felt incredibly tired, because she also walked a lot in the fresh air. And running into the young lord turned out to be not such a terrible thing, because in the end, nothing happened. The young miss was very tired, so she decided to go to Sarah to have a tasty meal and relax. But at that moment she looked up and saw the outline of an evil wolf, and this silhouette scared her incredibly. The body reacted instinctively, and the girl began to tremble all over, but she understood that she was in no way in danger. The young man with wolf ears was himself frightened by the loud voice, because the girl actually screamed when she saw him. Judging by its ears, this wolf was a werewolf, but the next second he covered his face with his hands and admitted that he had never wanted to scare the young lady. The young man was the commander of the Silver Knights Order, and the girl wanted to know who he was and why he was hiding his face. Golf covered his face, because the lady had once been frightened when she saw him, and that was at the very beginning of their acquaintance. His wolf-like appearance was definitely frightening, but in reality, this young man was not scary at all. Therefore, the little girl declared that he was in no way scary for her, and he could be near her, and she would not be afraid of him. Golf was delighted, because he had decided to honor today as a holiday forever, because the young miss was not afraid of him at all. As it turned out, he was seeing off a special guest, and that was the reason he was here now. This guest asked for time to talk with Lady Grey, and the little girl was curious to know what kind of person he was. As soon as she saw his appearance, she immediately realized what kind of scoundrel he was, and he was a puppet of a prince named Weston. In his past life, this young man managed to commit many bad deeds, and he never behaved very well. One day he brought a slipper for Sarah that the girl had left at the ball, but it seemed that the slipper had magic attached to it, and only one person could put it on. Then the young man asked to entrust this matter to him, promising to definitely find the owner of the crystal slipper. And as soon as he found Lady Sarah, he declared that His Highness was looking for her and wanted to see her as soon as possible. He promised that His Highness the Prince would swear eternal love to the girl and would also devote his whole life and look only at her. The promise of eternal love and vows to be together did not come true, and to her misfortune, Cinderella was not rewarded with attention from the prince at all. He tried to prove to Cinderella that she was being stupid and probably didn't know what a woman who met a man outside the royal palace and raised her status was called. This lady was called Cinderella, and the prince assured that it was only thanks to him that she became this symbol. Weston called Cinderella an ordinary commoner, who, in his opinion, not only did not support him, but also stole his attention and position. He was the culprit who gave Sarah to the prince. The little girl knew this, so she wanted to stop the scoundrel immediately before he did something stupid. The enraged young miss asked Golf for help because she was going to separate this man from Sarah right now so that he would not do anything nasty. The young lady wanted to help her friend as soon as possible, so she asked the young man to pick her up right now and carry her in that direction. Golf did not understand what the little girl was asking for, but according to his logic, the young miss was asking for hugs, and she probably needed it now. Therefore, the beastman in the guise of a werewolf grabbed the girl in his arms with complete confidence and joyfully asked her to hold on tighter. The little girl just wanted to help Sarah as soon as possible because she saw how that same scoundrel was still talking to her. The young man tried to persuade the lady to change her mind and listen to him, but she confidently replied that she had absolutely nothing to discuss with him. He insisted that the young miss had not yet made her debut in high society, which should affect her future. He tried to persuade Sarah and was even ready to send an invitation to a banquet in honor of the birthday of His Highness the Prince, if only she would tell him where her house was. The heroine understood that she was not a lady of some outstanding family because her family had always treated her like a servant. Therefore, she was sure that even if the young man sent an invitation, her family would not be happy about it. And then he realized that Sarah was probably adopted or even an illegitimate child. But it didn't matter to him at all, because he was sure that with such an appearance, a girl could easily become a lover, if not the wife of the prince himself. The lady had no intention of speaking to him anymore, saying that the young man was behaving too tactlessly and should leave. At that moment, the gentleman suddenly grabbed the girl by the hand and asked if they or she no longer dreamed of becoming the prince's legal wife. Sarah screamed for the young man to let her go, but he even began to offer his candidacy for the role of husband and the status of viscountess. While he was persistently trying to persuade the heroine, the young miss, holding a tiny hammer in her hands, had already rushed straight at him. The little girl tried to protect her friend from the villain as quickly as possible and was ready to use any methods. Holding the family hammer in her hands, she felt a huge power within herself and knew that this hammer was sacred, but her father asked her not to hit people. But the little girl was sure that the Viscount was not human at all, so everything was fine and she could hit him. Elodie was flying very high, so high that the heroine even began to worry whether the girl was okay after landing. The baby was perfectly fine, but she must have lived. Nor did this man and his girlfriend say anything strange. Golf heard that Mr. Weston had come as a representative of the Board of Foreign Trade and had given him permission to speak to Lara because he was the heir of the family. But the young man was behaving in a completely unreasonable manner, and Golf felt guilty for allowing him to communicate with Lady Sarah. Since the little girl had hit the Viscount right on the head with the hammer, he still didn't understand anything and felt dizzy. Golf held the Viscount while the little heroine rejoiced that she had managed to defeat a real villain. The Duke appeared and asked why there was so much noise in the palace and no fighting at all. The Duke asked someone to explain what was going on here, because the picture he saw was truly strange. At the most opportune moment, Grandpa appeared, and the little girl was sure that if she managed, taking advantage of the opportunity, she would be able to drive away Mr. Weston completely. When the Viscount woke up, his hands and feet were tied. He did not understand why he was in such a state. The Duke sat in front of him, along with his assistant and the girl, and the Viscount was outraged that the guest had been arrested since he had only come to check the contract. He spoke of disrespect, but the Duke said that the young man had been shooting his eyes at his dear guest, and he had even dared to touch her, and that was what was called real disrespect. The Viscount stated that he had never seen the girl before, so he wanted to send her an invitation, and he allegedly thought that this would be a good chance for the girl to appear in high society. But the Duke was not going to listen to his lies because he had Elodie, whose words he trusted. The Duke insisted that the little lady was saying something completely different and that he had indeed come here for that reason. Not only did he show disrespect to the guest, but he also stole an expensive item that belonged to the family. The Viscount was sure that the Duke had absolutely no evidence, and he acted with caution. But the young lady saw with her own eyes how the magical cotton fell out of the Viscount's pocket, and this was direct evidence of his guilt. The Viscount was sure that he had definitely put the cotton in the magic pocket, and did not understand how it had fallen out. Magic cotton was like a living creature, but its essence was a clot of magic. If a person without mana absorbed it, he would be able to use magic, so it was a very rare commodity. Magic cotton was found in the Viscount's pocket. It grows in a small number of estates, and it was definitely not in his estate, and the Viscount definitely could not have taken it with him. And probably the Viscount was going to justify himself with an obvious lie, as if he didn't know where he got the magic cotton from, although in fact, he simply stole it. It was obvious to the Duke, and there was nothing else to see here, so he ordered the Viscount to be dealt with according to the rules. According to the Valkyrisan statute, a visitor must study the list of prohibited items to take out in advance, and if this happens, the guest is forbidden to enter the duchy for 3 years. When the Viscount heard about his punishment, he did not see anything terrible in it, although the Duke was obviously just intimidating him. That was not all, and the one who took out all of it, which is listed as rare and protected, is expelled only after the wrists are cut off. After this, the Viscount was truly frightened and asked the Duke to give him a second chance, since he was only following the orders of His Highness the Prince. He was sure that His Highness should consider his punishment, and asked for a chance to at least contact the Prince. But the Duke was sure that there was no absolute need for this, because his assistant held a magic ball for negotiations. And the Prince had already heard the entire conversation and was aware of all the smallest details of what had happened. The little girl was angry because she knew that this young man was an impudent deceiver and a thief. The Viscount turned to the Prince so that his master would listen to him, since his shame was not his fault at all. But the principal first asked why the Viscount dared to commit theft in Valkyrisan itself. The Prince himself said that he wanted to use magic, and the young man was surprised that the Viscount really thought that he would want the stolen thing. The Viscount insisted that up until now the Prince had liked all the things he brought, and all these things were magical. And the Prince only now learned that all the magical items he brought were brazenly stolen from other people. One day the Prince said that he wanted to have jewelry that used silverstone, and the Viscount soon presented it to his master. But the Prince declared that if he had known that these things had been stolen, he would never have accepted them in that case. The Prince admitted the guilt of his subordinate, who was uncultured, and asked for forgiveness because everything happened because he was unable to control him in advance. Therefore, the Prince ordered that the assistant be dealt with according to the rules of Valkyrisan, since he was indeed to blame for this situation. The Prince was raging inside because of this incident, but now he could do absolutely nothing. The Prince asked the Duke to make sure that the Viscount would never have the courage to repeat something like that again. The Viscount lied with an insolent face, silently admitting and knowing that all these jewels were stolen. The little heroine rejoiced. She managed to eliminate Weston, and therefore no one would have to deal with the Prince himself anymore. But she treated the Crown Prince with particular caution, because much could also be expected from this man. Therefore, the little heroine was not going to trust anyone, because she could feel the rotten soul of people and knew that she would soon see the Prince. She was a little concerned about the Prince's last words, but still the little girl was sure that she had done the right thing and stopped the meeting between Sarah and the Viscount. She was afraid of trouble when the Duke was going to contact the Prince, but thanks to Sarah going to her room, they were able to quietly oppress Mr. Weston. But the young lady did not even think that the Viscount would come immediately as soon as he heard the news. But first, she decided that right now she needed to relax and unwind with her best friend. As soon as Sarah opened the door for her, the girl immediately felt that something was wrong with her. Sarah didn't look like her usual self, and there was no usual radiant smile on her face. The little girl asked what had happened and whether Sarah was upset about Mr. Weston. They decided to put him in an underground prison until the Prince arrived, but Sarah assured that this was absolutely not the case. The girl did not understand why she was not allowed to be there when the Duke contacted His Highness the Prince. In that situation, she saw that the little girl was confused, so at first she went to her room, but now she thought that she had disturbed something or there was something that she should not know. It seemed that Elodie had hurt Sarah's feelings, but she was scared to even think about what would have happened if Sarah had been in that place and had encountered the Prince. It would be good if Sarah never knew about her unhappy past life, and of course the young lady did not want to keep secrets from her, much less upset her. She wanted Sarah to not be limited by her past life and to start her own path, so the little girl tried her best, but she couldn't tell everything. She confidently stated that the Viscount spoke poorly, so she thought that it would be difficult for her friend to be around him. But Sarah didn't understand why she liked her so much, because she was sure that she had no right to such excessive love. As soon as the girl heard these words, a real storm broke out in her soul, and she did not understand why her friend was saying this. After all, Sarah was a person worthy of love and respect, and she certainly shouldn't have that opinion of herself. This girl was the only one who taught her to love, and also to be grateful for warmth and care. Little Miss was originally an insignificant field mouse, and the heroine was the only one who loved her. Sarah had always protected her, but she couldn't even take care of herself, so now the little heroine wanted to protect her when she finally had the opportunity. The little girl did not hide her feelings, and Sarah reciprocated them completely, asking the young miss not to worry anymore. Finally, Elodie told about her feelings because she didn't want her friend to cry and get upset. Until now, the heroine lived in a mansion and endured everything, not because of stupidity, kindness, or great desire. There was nothing she really wanted in that mansion, and no matter what she did there, her life didn't improve, and she simply agreed to the role assigned to her. But now everything was different in the heroine's life, and she had something that she would never allow to be taken away from her. This is friendship, love, complete mutual understanding, and respect that she had dreamed of for so long. So Sarah hugged her beloved little friend, wanting to cope on her own and never see the little one in danger again. With these thoughts, the heroine was going to move forward, and Hellas finally saw in her eyes the desire to find a happy life. It turns out that Sarah was only limited by the past, and the young miss tried to do the impossible out of a simple desire to protect her. Sarah smiled and understood the girl's feelings perfectly, promising that if something like this happened next time, they would share the situation together. From now on, the young miss needed to focus on the current Sarah because she had to protect her not in the past, but in the present. The next day, the duchy enjoyed fine summer weather, and things went on as usual in the mansion. The contract with Viscount Weston was finally broken, because it was his fault that there was an obvious theft, and now they definitely won't be able to cause problems. They say that today Mr. Weston was deprived of the title of heir. The little heroine was unspeakably happy about this. After the news, Viscount Weston immediately came and apologized for his son's theft, so his wrists were not cut off. It seemed that there was not a soul in the club he wanted a commercial agreement, but the Duke, of course, did not accept it, knowing that one could not trust the intentions of the Viscount. The Viscount, who had exchanged his son's wrist for the chance of a long-term contract, was very angry and was also stripped of his title and sent to a monastery. The little heroine thought that this was the end of it, but the magical cotton balls again reminded her of what happened. They seemed to recognize the Ratson family blood, but the little girl didn't know how these things were connected. Because her family's blood contains the energy of Venus, the god of Anemanolia, and near the girl it was easy for the magic balls to maintain their true form. It was surprising because the cotton balls were not living beings, but they seemed to have an instinct that wanted attention. For some reason, they followed the young lady and seemed to stick to her hands, which in itself was very strange. The assistant decided to express his opinion, and all his life he had been an extremely rational person. But the moment the lady arrived in Valkyrison, he began to feel how this rationality was becoming powerless. It seemed that nothing could be done about instinct, and the inability to hold on to the power completely consumed the young man, and he felt that there were too many impulses. The little girl suggested that the young man probably misunderstood the meaning of powerlessness. These were the general symptoms that werewolves felt when they saw a young lady, and now she was completely confused. The little girl got scared and asked her grandfather if someone was going to eat her, because when werewolves see her, they can't control themselves. But grandfather confidently stated that if the young miss continued to be afraid, it would be very difficult for her to adapt to the duchy. The man asked his assistant to remain sane and not to talk nonsense to the young lady he had just frightened. So the young man could only stand and watch, but for some reason it seemed to him that the Duke was just bragging. The Duke inquired how things were going with a matter they had recently discussed. His Highness the Prince stated that he was going to personally come to the duchy as an apology, and the young lady did not expect such a turn of events. She began to get nervous and toss and turn right in the Duke's arms, realizing that too many worries awaited her. This annoying man was going to come straight to the duchy, and the little girl knew that she would have to meet him. She angrily declared that this time she would hit him with the sacred hammer, intending to swing it straight at the prince. If he even tries to do something stupid to Sarah, the little heroine will use her hammer to defend herself. Even grandfather allowed her to take the hammer with her, but it seems that Dad gave it to his daughter not out of such wishes at all. Grandfather smiled and warned that if the young lady was going to swing it at the prince, he would have to clean up the mess. If she had her way, little one, she would have knocked him down 100 times, because in the case of Mr. Viscount, the matter was resolved easily, so he was just lucky. But she couldn't swing her hammer at the prince without thinking, and there was only one way left to gather reinforcements. Grandfather or Edmund were definitely not suitable because they have a high status, so at the slightest thing, the problem could become bigger. The prince's actions should not be a subject of controversy, so the little lady needed people who could slightly scare him and drive him away completely. While the assistant tried to look more accommodating, he even put on round glasses, but the Duke said he still inspired fear. The little girl tried to figure out what to do next, and turned to her grandfather with one important request. The young lady with joyful eyes declared that she would like to go and see the Order of Knights, which she had never seen. The little girl managed to get to the training ground, where the knights trained every day under the leadership of the commander. She looked carefully at the knightly order and all the beastmen who were there. Many were perplexed, because knights were not allowed to approach the young lady, but for some reason, she was now sitting in the arms of a werewolf. The young man asked to stop the ridiculous talk because the lady wanted to make a statement, so everyone should listen to her carefully. The knights laughed, because no one could have thought that the young lady would want to address them. The little girl turned to the knights and said that she was going to create a team and entrust them with a secret mission. The prince stated that he would soon come to the duchy as an apology, but his goal is not an apology, and he simply wants to find the one who disgraced him. Of course, you can ask your grandfather to send him away before he does something stupid, but later there may be a conflict between the kingdom and the empire. The little Lily was sure that if the prince encountered Sarah, trouble would happen, so she warned that it was necessary to scare and drive away the prince. She needed a group that could instill fear, and the knightly order was just right for the secret mission. Everyone started to raise their hands, but Golf asked them to remain quiet because the little miss was not finished yet. And for your information, the number of personnel is limited to 5 people. Since this is a secret mission, there is no need to be conspicuous. The knights were already ready to rush into battle and cross swords properly, but force was not needed in this operation. What was needed here was acting, which was more important, and the little girl let everyone know that. After her words, Mr. Leopard, the commander of the Golden Knightly Order, came out, who was sure that he was an absolute expert in this. But the young lady did not name the leopard, so Golf asked him not to disturb the meeting and simply disappear without a trace. The leopard said that the young lady simply didn't know anything about him yet, and he definitely had a chance. He asked the little lady if he had the right to participate in the operation of the Golden Order. The leopard joked that the secret mission was connected with the princesses of the Knightly Order, and this was an affectionate nickname for his beloved. Hearing the word princess, the young miss frowned, because the leopard clearly took it as a joke. At that moment, the princesses, the beast girls, appeared on the training ground and noticed that the leopard had started an argument with the Silver Order again. The little girl was surprised because the leopard clearly had more than one lover, but she misunderstood everything, and like a lion, he retained his animal habits. One of the knights laughed because if it were a question of habits and closeness to an animal, he would probably be walking on 4 legs now. The knights often made fun of the leopard, a beastman who thought highly of himself and thought he was simply perfect. The young lady thought about it and decided that it would be better to carry out the operation by choosing only the beastmen and wolves, and not to touch the womanizing leopard at all. The knights put out their swords, they declared, because the commander had clearly given the order that no one should approach the girl. A few days later, Edmund was in the library, looking for a particular book for himself. He was unable to find solitude in the library, because soon he was joined by another hero who wanted to talk to him. It was the Prince of the Kingdom of Silveria, Chesarmadon, who confessed to the young man that they had not seen each other for a long time. It seemed that he had finally arrived in the Duchy of Valkyrison, and the Duke was sure that if the matter concerned the past matter, he thought that it had long been finished. The prince came because he thought it would be better to apologize in person and at the same time look at the face of his childhood friend. That's why he always felt that the prince was a very annoying person and that he took too many liberties for someone he had only seen a couple of times in childhood. He insisted that this story had long since ended, but the prince insisted that his servant was guilty and he must be held accountable. Everything was resolved according to the law of Valkyriesen, so Edmund was sure that there was no longer any need to pay attention to this situation. The prince began to get gradually angry, because the Duke had just ordered him to do as had already been decided. He had heard strange rumors that a beautiful girl was staying in Valkyriesen who would steal your gaze as soon as you encountered her. The prince was sure that the prince fell in love with her at first sight and understood perfectly well who was being talked about. But even if it wasn't so, it didn't matter anymore, and the prince simply became curious, since Edmund was trying to hide it. He insisted on a personal apology, insisting that it was just common sense, but Edmund didn't want to talk to him at all. And no one who stays in Valkyriesen has any reason to become His Highness's plaything, even if that person is the future heir to the royal throne. In response to his words, the prince called the Duke simply ill-mannered and decided to ask something in return. And he promised that if he answered, he would do as Edmund wished and would not interfere in this matter anymore. They say his word gas was going to steal the magic cotton, and now the prince has learned of its location, because if something valuable is released, it will lose its re. So the young man wanted to know why the Duke did not use the magical powers of cotton, but Edmund admitted that he had absolutely no reason to do so. Edmund inherited the Duke's talent in its original form and fencing skills that exceeded moral limits, so if he uses the magic cotton, his value will increase, and wherever he goes, everyone will respect him. The young man saw no need to desire power that did not originally belong to you. For some, these might have been desirable abilities, but the young man was sure that if he acquired them without any effort and respect, it would be tactless. He was lucky enough to be born an aristocrat and enjoy many things, so Edmund did not want to take his share and steal someone else's chance. He still couldn't get Edmund to have a frank conversation because the young man was still closed to him. He was sure that if he mastered basic magic, he could get a chance to save the previous Duke, but at that moment, Edmund got tired of his speeches, and he put his sword forward, asking the prince to stop right now. Raising his hands up, the young man quickly realized that he had crossed the line in delicate communication. It seemed that Edmund had succeeded in angering the prince, and they were still at odds with each other as before, and nothing had changed over the course of time. Therefore, you only promised to call a man to accompany the gentleman, but he refused and only asked to convey his regards to Hertshoff. Then it seemed to Edmund that the prince would not retreat so easily, and probably he had already planned something, and the Duke only hoped that this man would not behave as he pleased in Valkyriesen. After talking with the Duke, the prince remained in his mansion for some time, standing near the sunny window. At that moment, the maid came up and was very frightened that the honorable gentleman was standing alone without an escort. The young man smiled sweetly at the maid and admitted that he was actually just secretly looking for someone. Having told that his servant had caused inconvenience to some girl, he would like to apologize to her personally, but he is completely unable to meet her. The maid understood that she couldn't just tell her location, and the principal promised to leave immediately after he apologized. He walked slowly through the Western Palace and saw no one else here, implying that this girl was not placed in the main mansion. It was a place where strangers could come and go as they pleased. And it was probably all an absurd game where someone was trying to prove that they cared about this girl. The prince was even more curious about what kind of ladies were they who were forced to resort to such tricks, and just as his plan to get the magic cotton had failed, he was furious. As he walked down a long corridor, he suddenly noticed balls of magical cotton swirling right in front of his face. The prince stopped, carefully examining the magical creatures, trying to understand where they came from. He remembered the words of the Duke, who did not want to possess a power that did not belong to him, and to take this ability away from someone else. Edmund, a man with extraordinary talent who can die and be resurrected, cannot understand that such power cannot be gained simply by desperately wanting it. The prince was sure that only he who was born for greatness could bring prosperity to the world, and it was he who would soon become the future ruler of the entire kingdom of Silveria. He was sure that magical power should rightfully belong to him first and foremost, and no one else should dare to use it. Just at that same time, the little girl was also looking for the magic cotton, and was delighted when she saw fluffy white flying balls. She was just looking for them, and the magical cotton seemed to be playing hide-and-seek with her. But suddenly she came across the young master. Elodie immediately guessed that the prince had decided to show rotten tricks again, and probably thought that he could easily give candy to the child. and it is quite possible that he had already searched the entire mansion in search of Sarah, and it was good that the little girl had placed the knights in the side palace in advance, and everything was going exclusively according to her plan. The girl politely stated her name, as this was required by the order of respect towards the prince. The prince knew that the missing child of the high priest's family had been brought here, but now this girl was probably standing right in front of him. Then he decided that he had no need to stand on ceremony and declared why such a little thing needed magic balls, since they originally belonged to him. Magic cotton was a protected species, and the young lady didn't understand when the prince suddenly became its owner, and now he could definitely get into trouble. The prince thought that the girl was just a child, but she turned out to be much smarter than she looked, which was a bit of a hindrance for him. And to put it simply, doesn't this mean that the magical cotton was waiting for him, avoiding other people's hands all these years? The prince wanted to absorb the magic cotton before this child brought help so that he could have magical powers. For some reason, the magical cotton should have crumbled and been absorbed, but the principal desperately held it in his hands. But nothing happened. The young lady saw all this and laughed at the prince inwardly, because even if he tried to swallow it 100 times, he would not succeed. Thanks to the divine energy, the magical cotton took on a new form, and a person of his level could never absorb it. The little girl laughed and said that it seemed that the magic cotton did not agree with the prince at all, that it should belong only to him. The gentleman began to get annoyed by the fact that the little girl dared to tease him, and also laughed right in his eyes. The mouse assured him that she was not teasing him at all, holding the soft magical cotton balls in her hands, and this made the prince even more furious. After he finally got angry, the prince said, "Does the little girl really not understand who is standing in front of her and thinks that everything goes unpunished because of her age?" He didn't know what trick she had pulled off, but he said that the girls needed to stop their pranks immediately. The sound of footsteps was heard nearby, and the young lady realized that the knights were heading here right now, because it was not for nothing that she had conspired with them. Seeing the team of knights, the young man did not understand what was happening here, because these were clearly the same people that the maid had sent. The baby jumped into Golf's arms, and the prince asked to be escorted to the guest rooms of the Western Palace, since a child unceremoniously whining about the ducal estates was not the most pleasant sight for him. Golf realized that the prince was standing right in front of him, and stated that, unfortunately, he had not noticed his presence here. The young man was in the Western Palace for some reason, and Golf did not think they could accompany him. The entire knightly squad came solely for the sake of this child, to take her away with them. At that moment, the prince realized that this little girl was the very heir that was rumored to be the heir, which meant that the magical cotton had gathered here not because of the heir of the high priest. Golf angrily asked what the prince intended to do with this child, since their communication was clearly not friendly. Details concerning this child must be reported, and Golf hoped for assistance. In principle, quite a lot, if it becomes known that he did not stop at the magic clap and dared to touch Lady Ratson. The father will definitely not remain on the sidelines, so no one should know about it. Calmness may eventually become an enemy, but suddenly the little girl informed Golf that it was Uncle who had just tried to steal the magic cotton. At that time, she was just getting ready to become a duke and was passing by, and this guy came up and said that all the magic cotton belonged only to him. And now the knights were trying to figure out whether the prince had really dared to claim the rights to the magical cotton and whether the girl's words were absolutely true. The prince smiled and said that he and the young miss had probably misunderstood each other because his question was about the ownership of the magic cotton, and he allegedly did not know then that it was the lady of the House of Redson. He was simply curious as to why the magical cotton followed people, and he claimed that he simply couldn't help himself. However, the little girl cried out that the prince was angry and meant to scold her, and there was a very unkind look in his eyes. The knights were furious. Someone went to report what had happened to the duke, and Golf wanted to know if this young man really dared to touch her. The prince had to refute the young girl's words, but in reality, he just wanted the little bug to shut her mouth as soon as possible. He stated that perhaps the young lady was a little shy and he would have to come back next time, pretending to be calm until the very end. But this was not a farewell. It was an outright escape, after which the young lady really hoped that the prince would not dare to repeat exactly the same trick. The knights were happy because the little lady managed to drive away the prince without any problems, and it was definitely a successful operation. Golf was the happiest of all, because everything went well, and the knights were even ready to play with the girl all day. But she understood that they were asking too much, and she had completely different things to do. When the prince left the palace, he realized that he had just almost screwed up because of a pathetic girl, and now an incredible rage was seething inside him. He had never met such a persistent little thing in his life, and he was sure that this little girl clearly knew what he was trying to do and was deliberately provoking him. And if it weren't for these suddenly appearing beasts, it's completely unknown what the cold-blooded prince could have done. Therefore, the gentleman was already thinking about how to get rid of this annoying girl so that she would not interfere with his plans. Perhaps it was even better that he finally saw what was happening in the ducal palace. The matter failed, and it certainly would not reach her father's ears, but now the prince knew their secret, and that was worth a lot. The prince was going to crush this little child along with her duke there, who didn't want to play by his rules. And he decided to go next time so that no one would dare to stand in his way again. From early morning, the knights trained on the site, practicing their fencing skills and abilities. The duke and his assistant, as well as the young lady and Sarah, watched their training to assess the capabilities of the knightly order. Some of the knights had been showing rapid growth lately, and this was definitely a good sign, and the girl noticed that the knights she had hugged had become noticeably stronger, and they were probably influenced by the power of Venus. The effect was like a magical clap that strengthened those nearby, and that wasn't bad at all. In 5 years, Valkyriesen will become a battlefield, so it is worth strengthening the troops in advance, and perhaps contacts with the knights and the young lady will have a positive effect. The duke's assistant, when he was near the girl, was overcome with the desire to bite her out of affection. The little girl was closely watching the knights' training, and the duke decided to share the information that the half had recently told her. That the young lady had gotten into an unpleasant situation because of the prince's appearance, and the duke knew absolutely everything about it. But Sarah knew nothing about this. She did not understand what troubles connected her best friend and the prince. No one told her anything, but she really wanted to know what it all meant and why it happened. They say Weston was the prince's servant. That's why he came, and it was probably because of her that he came. Elodie wanted to keep everything related to the prince a secret and thought about how to explain to Sarah what happened. She stated that it was all just minor, no problems, and she didn't get a single scratch. And if grandfather hadn't made a mountain out of a molehill, everything would have gone smoothly, and Sarah wouldn't have been so upset. The lady admitted that perhaps in this situation she would have kept silent too, because she was afraid that she would not be able to help this girl. She had absolutely no strength to stand as a worthy support for her, and she admitted this to the little girl. She called herself stupid and thought that the girl would rely on her, being helpless herself. And now the heroine just wanted to become stronger, strong enough that the young lady could rely on her. Sarah realized that she needed to gain strength to confront the threats that could harm the health of her beloved friend. The young lady asked why Sarah was saying such words, since she was already constantly defending her. The baby didn't want her to suffer, but could she protect her forever in such a small body, improvising as she went? If you think about it, the sphere never wanted to be just protected, and in the future, it had to turn to the prince because people were dying without timely help. She was willing to offer to heal them and also wanted to fulfill her duty as a princess to be useful. But she was always told that Serafina was talking nonsense because she was a princess without the support of a simple family and did not have the strength to protect even herself. She was always asked to mind her own business, and the little mouse knew this very well. The sadness was not only caused by the prince's words, because she never wanted a luxurious life and did not dream of wealth. Sarah had an incredible need for protection, but it wasn't her true desire to have someone protect her all the time. Sarah always wanted to become stronger, but in her past life the prince blocked her path, and now the young lady could do it. And if the girl felt that she wanted to grow further and improve her skills, the little girl was only ready to support her with joy. So she admitted to her friend that she was indeed right and had to do only what she wanted. The lady looked into the kind eyes of her friend and asked how she could help her. The little girl wanted to be her support until the girl got back on her feet and was ready to talk to her father to be accepted into the Ratson house. According to the Duke, this is unlikely to work, since according to the laws of the kingdom, beastmen and people cannot interact. Even if Sarah were declared an adopted daughter, according to the laws it would have no effect. The Duke warned that if the girl had nowhere to go and needed protection, she could become part of the Valkyriesen. But unfortunately for Sarah, this was a protected area. Every year in Animalolia, many children are abandoned, even the weak or, on the contrary, too strong. They could even be driven out for trifles, and the little girl was outraged by such behavior towards the beastman. This is why Valkyriesen collected such children, and even the Duke's assistant was himself an orphan, whom he once saved and gave him a new life. The children are protected by the Valkyriesen until they can live on their own, and because of this, the Duke has been called a paradise for outcasts. But the point was that the duchy was full of abandoned children, and an extra girl certainly wouldn't change anything. The idea sounded tempting, because as long as the young lady could be under the Duke's wing, she would certainly be safe. Upon hearing this proposal, Sarah thanked the Duke for his help, but ultimately refused the name Valkyriesen. Instead, she wanted to ask for support, and wanted to return her name to the family tree, and after that she would be fully grateful. The little girl asked if Sarah was absolutely sure of this, since it was clearly better to remain under the Duke's protection for now. This offer was also very tempting for her, but the girl probably had completely different thoughts on this matter. Even if she was always humiliated in the Bluewood house, it was still the place where she was born and raised, and she wanted to take back her rights. Moreover, it was there that she met a little mouse who became her Archer of Light. That's why now the heroine wanted to come back and fix everything, to finally get her name and family honor back. When the Duke heard about the support, he didn't think she would ask for minimal help. In fact, the Duke had planned to wipe Bluewood off the face of the earth at the request of the Ratsons, but decided to consider another option. Some time ago, the Duke contacted his subordinates to decide what to do with the Bluewood family. Then he ordered the destruction of the family, and perhaps something worse, which the heroines did not yet know about. The Duke said that if this was the lady's true proposal, they would certainly have to show leniency towards her family. The heroine did not understand why the little girl made such a decision, because it was she who suffered from her family. But since this was the Sulphur's native home, neither name, nor rank, nor title were of any importance to her. And if the Bluewood family disappears, the Count will simply wait for death or decide to commit suicide. And this means that there will be no revenge, because there will be no one left who could suffer. It is better to give false hope and press slowly, especially if the last thing left is your own soul. Sarah's rather sophisticated revenge was simply brilliant, because she was going to take away the one who was never accepted by her own family. The Duke assured that the longer you hold on to hope, the more terrible the fall will be, but he was ready to support the girl in any situation. He sent his grandson Edmund along with Sarah, who was supposed to help the lady finally regain her rightful name. In the Kingdom of Silveria, there is a law that no other country has, and it states that all children have the right to inherit. Direct descendants are given priority, and this law was passed because the previous king, who had no daughter, did not want to pass on royal power to another family. That is, the legal heir to the House of Dishes is not the stepmother's daughters, but Seraphina Bluewood, she and only she. The Duke conveyed the exact information to his grandson, and now he knew how he should behave in this situation, riding in a carriage through the peaceful green forests. The young man promised to help in any way he could, but the lady was already grateful that he simply agreed to accompany her. The Duke turned out to be an incredibly good man, but Edmund smiled and replied that this was not entirely true. They say that truly good people don't know how good they are and are often too hard on themselves. Surely this was indeed the case, and the young lady certainly could not yet know all the peculiarities of adult life. Suddenly, the girl's stomach began to rumble, and she sweetly admitted that the doctor had been drinking, and that she hadn't even had time to eat. In his past life, even as an adult, Edmund always carried mountains of sunflower seeds for the mice, and gave them out so much that entire legends about the mysterious man began to circulate among the machines. It was he who scattered the seeds everywhere, and the maid herself told the little girl about this. So she asked the gentleman if he had any seeds left, but for some reason this time everything turned out differently. To her surprise, the Duke had no seeds at all, and the little girl had no idea that something like this could happen. Perhaps something happened to Edmund after this, or something changed in his life that influenced this. He admitted that he constantly carried seeds because he thought about Lady Ratson, who had been missing for a long time. He was worried about the child wandering alone in a strange country and not being able to recognize her, But he hoped that at least she would not go hungry, so he gave all the mice some seeds. But now that the lady had found it, there was absolutely no need for it, and the young miss was even thinking that if they couldn't find a child for such a long time, it was probably time to strive for it. This one had to be too kind and for the event, but unfortunately now he had no seeds, but there were delicious aromatic cookies with nuts. Just in case, before leaving, he asked to prepare the baby's favorite food. This man was truly dangerous, because anyone in the young lady's place would have been head over heels for him long ago. Even though Elodie was small and cute, Sarah was sure that using food to win people over was a little wrong. But the young man had a completely different opinion, and he just wanted to please the girl and also feed her. So he stated that this did not mean at all that he wanted to win her over, and he certainly had no such intentions. The young man only promised to help in any way he could, but now it seemed like he had something to hide, because his reaction was different from the previous one. When they arrived at the appointed place, Edmund decided to scout out the situation and asked the girls not to rush and to approach when it was convenient for them. Sarah spoke of Edmund as a real child thief, and even in ordinary food she saw some kind of threat, deciding that she could not let her guard down. It was strange, because the little girl thought that she should have kept this thing away from Sarah, but for some reason, Sarah herself now began to suspect him. No one knew why Edmund decided to go in first and ask the lady to wait a little. After all, they didn't even warn the Bluewood family about their visit, and as soon as the heroines entered, they saw the Count's family sitting on the floor with their heads bowed. Her father, stepmother, and even her sisters bowed before the Lord, and the sword was first aimed at her father. When he saw his daughter enter, he shouted loudly for Seraphina to stop this madness immediately. After all, she clearly didn't come to save him, and he was outraged at how she could do this to her own father. Sarah always appeared so confident in front of the Duke, but now she was very worried and nervous. She confessed to her father that she had been suffering from insomnia since she left here, and the man only assured her that she was simply homesick and had always been a good girl. But what he really wanted was for the lady to explain to this gentleman that there was a misunderstanding and that he should not be treated as if he were a criminal. Suddenly, Sarah declared that she had not been able to sleep all this time because of the anger that had filled her and the courtesy of the ducal house. She acutely felt how much she was despised here. With every word, Sarah felt more and more confident because she wanted justice to finally prevail. And since she is the youngest daughter, she preserved the honor of the Bluewood family when it was almost lost. The Count was outraged and considered his daughter's words to be complete nonsense, and she naturally did not see any gratitude from him. But now, for some reason instead of her, the Count himself was lying on the floor on his knees with his head bowed, and now she was not trying to convince him at all. First of all, the girl had a main business with her stepmother, with whom she was going to talk right now. About 2 weeks ago, she found out that it turns out her name is not even in the family register. The name was entered into the genealogical book immediately after birth, but it is strange that the only direct heir is not listed in any way. And she told her stepmother that this meant only one thing: someone had deliberately erased her name so that the girl could not inherit anything from the family line. The Countess pleaded, assuring him that she could not commit such a vile act of wickedness and that it was probably some kind of big mistake. Having tenderly extended her hand to the Countess, the lady admitted that if it had been a strange mistake, they could probably easily include her name. Kneeling, the Countess promised to speak with the Count immediately and do everything to ensure that the lady would not experience any more inconvenience. But at that moment, another sister became indignant, calling Sarah an ordinary cook, whom for some reason Mother began to fear. Probably Rose did not understand her plight and called Sarah a pathetic Cinderella, unworthy of a respectable family. The Countess asked for forgiveness for the spoiled lady, who still does not know decency, promising to definitely teach her good manners. Sarah noticed that she herself, at an even younger age, was subject to completely absurd demands. But giving in to emotions was a waste of time, because people were even more pathetic and insignificant than she remembered. The reason for the lady's return was very simple, and firstly, she wanted to regain the name that rightfully belonged to her, and secondly, to receive the relics of her deceased mother back, and after that she was ready to say goodbye to her hated family forever. Sarah promised to complete the task to the end and asked her stepmother to accompany her to the treasury so as not to waste too much time on it. All this time, the Count sat on his knees under Edmund's sword and understood how much of a disadvantage he was in. There was no longer the constant hope that one day she would be appreciated and loved, and despite the atrocities of these people, she still tried to believe in them. Now it turned out to be a stupid, unrealistic dream, and these people no longer meant anything to her, and they were complete strangers to each other. The stepmother obediently escorted the lady to the treasury of the Bluewood mansion, where expensive family heirlooms were kept. The stepmother carefully hid all the jewelry, and only she had access to the family treasures. She brought out one box and asked if it would be enough for the lady, but now the heroine wanted to check everything herself. It looked like an ordinary treasure chest, but the little girl felt a strange energy emanating from it. Her attention was drawn to the bracelet behind the glass, and it looked too expensive to be displayed like that. It was a braided gold bracelet with an unknown red stone in the center. There was no sign of trouble, but as soon as the young lady looked at the decoration, she felt as if her head was splitting into small pieces and was about to explode. The outlines of the people standing in front of her became blurry, and everyone was afraid that the little girl had really become ill. Suddenly, the young lady was plunged into a vision in which someone blessed her noble birth. The hero in the dark robe was Nyx Basilisk, and for some reason he swore eternal and immeasurable loyalty to the girl. This vision was frightening, because the girl was in an unknown forest with a basilisk, and she just wanted her mommy and daddy to take her away as soon as possible. Basilisk asked the girl not to dramatize, because this was just the beginning, and she had her whole life ahead of her to cry her heart out. So the basilisk said that if the Almighty was really watching over her, he would always lend her a helping hand. After all, this girl was not ordinary, but the daughter of the great Ratson family, which could even cast a curse on anyone. As soon as the young lady woke up, her eyes were full of fear and horror, and no one understood what was happening to her. But it was obvious to everyone that the little girl had just managed to see something connected with one jewel. The Duke suggested using the artifact to return to Valkyrison and find out the details of what happened. The girl interrupted him abruptly and loudly asked where the lady had managed to get this bracelet, which was lying on a velvet pillow under glass. At first glance, it appeared to be an ordinary luxury item without any identifying marks such as engraving or family crest. But from the memories that had just flashed before the young lady's eyes, she knew that this thing actually belonged to the person who had cursed her. And this is not just an ordinary bracelet, but an item with which a terrible spell was cast, and it belonged to Nyx Basilisk. The bracelet was right here in the Bluewood treasury where she first opened her eyes after losing her memory, and it certainly couldn't be a strange coincidence. The young lady immediately stated that her stepmother had received the bracelet in exchange for a deal with the person who had kidnapped her, but she insisted that it had been brought by a masked man. Clutching the sword tighter in his hands, the Duke asked the Countess to tell the whole truth right now. But she insisted that she was telling the truth, and that the young man had said something strange, that this bracelet was payment for ridding the mansion of rodents. And the stepmother would not have been able to create such a huge house, and since everything was fine with Lady Ratson, she declared that she had absolutely nothing to do with it. The stepmother left all the housework to Sarah anyway, and catching mice was the last thing she cared about. Therefore, it is possible that the Countess's negligence saved the little mouse from a humiliating death, since such a reprisal is nothing more than mockery on the part of the basilisk. The little girl asked to give her the bracelet immediately, but the Countess insisted that it was not even a family heirloom, and why on earth should she give it away? Sarah wondered if her stepmother was going to refuse, since the bracelet belonged to a stranger, and she had no reason to hold on to it. But in reality, she just wanted to sell it for a higher price, but now her plans were not destined to come true. It's amazing how it could happen that part of the little girl's memories returned as soon as she saw the bracelet, but thanks to it, she remembered an important name. She returned 15 years ago, retaining the memory of events that were supposed to happen in the future. This time is enough to take revenge in abundance. This time, she was not going to let this man get away with it, and was determined to meet Nyx Basilisk himself, who had cast a terrible curse on her. After several days, the origin of the bracelet could not be traced, but apparently the gemstone was a red diamond. The bracelet was very expensive and rare, but it was not specially crafted as an artifact, and there was no hope of success, since the Basilisk family leads a very secluded life. But if the bracelet had an ordinary stone, the little lady couldn't understand how it had managed to capture her memories. Perhaps they were created by her child self, since it seems that the fraudster himself did not expect that memories would remain in the bracelet. Sarah thanked the young man with all her heart for his help, but he considered it just a trifle and the fulfillment of his duty. Therefore, I could not even imagine what the heroines had to go through. I was sure that it was a very difficult path. He warned that if he could help with anything else, they could definitely turn to him for help at any time. This was very valuable because Mr. Edmund acted wisely and knew what a hard life the girls had had before. He managed to melt Sarah's heart with kind words, and the little girl decided to quickly change the subject so that the young man would not steal the heart of her best friend. She asked if he knew anything about the basilisk's family, and perhaps the dukes could find some information. Members of the basilisk family do not use their real names, only pseudonyms, and they hide their bodies and faces under cloaks even when appearing in public. They were probably also involved in all sorts of crimes, but these were only guesses from Hellas. Suddenly, the Duke asked if this bracelet belonged to one of the basilisk, and the young lady decided to ask about it. Judging by Edmund's look, he was ready to gather an army right now, but most likely the real culprit was hiding behind the basilisk. The little girl admitted that she had simply heard all sorts of horror stories about this family and was afraid that they might do something bad to her. The basilisks were extremely greedy and selfish people. If they kidnapped the only high priest, then their payment would be too high. The Duke could not even imagine what could be offered to them in return, and the lady again that they could agree to the post of high priest. And no matter how high the price, wouldn't it be enough to put the fate of an entire family at stake, and for the sake of this opportunity to become a representative of the Almighty? And also, in her memories, Nyx's face reminded the young lady of someone. She was absolutely sure of it. Sharon Valkyrison, the Duke's second grandson, was incredibly similar to that basilisk, like father and son. The feeling of alienation that she had never experienced with Edmund and felt for the first time with Karen was probably due to this. The Duke's assistant said that in Animalonia, children are also abandoned every year for various reasons. People find such children, save them and take care of them until they become independent, and perhaps Karen was one of these foundlings. For from what the little lady had seen, he was treated differently, and even the Duke himself feared Karen, but at the same time protected him, keeping him locked up in a remote palace. It was just a girl's guess, and perhaps this child is not Karen the Basilisk, from the ancient line of basilisk. In that case, could it be that the basilisks had intentionally planted their spy, but the boy was still too young? But if the Duke decided to protect him, it was unclear why he was hiding him and keeping him locked up all the time. And this fact clearly indicated that the Duke could definitely be hiding something from the other residents of the mansion, and in particular about this boy. The young heroine was sure that if the Duke himself was covering for Karen, then Edmund probably knew about it too. So she decided to ask how his little brother was doing, but the young man only replied that because of his illness, he did not leave the palace. The little girl tried to find out the details and asked if the disease was contagious and that absolutely no one should come near him. This was a complete lie because in that case, would he really have been allowed to freely walk around the mansion? And the fact of the disease was probably just a fiction. After all, the Duke's third grandson was destined to die at a very young age. But if Karen really was of the basilisk lineage, he had to be saved at any cost because there was not much time left. This means that the young lady will have to meet the Duke's third grandson again, and from the very first day she became human, she had the ability to self-heal, so even the most terrible infection did not threaten her. She looked at the young man with sad eyes and asked if the boy wasn't bored sitting locked up all the time without communicating with his peers. In truth, Edmund had no contact with his brother, as the only way to contact him was through a magical artifact, but he never responded to it. Suddenly, the young lady asked some very unexpected questions, asking if Edmund wanted her to cure him. The young man categorically replied that this was completely impossible and immediately apologized for speaking too loudly. He didn't even expect that Elodie would offer to cure his brother of an illness that absolutely no one talks about. The feeling of indignation just burst out of him by accident, and the young man admitted that the fact is that even the most holy Ratson himself could not cure his illness. As sad as it may sound, Karen's condition has been deteriorating with each passing year, and things are likely much worse now. Therefore, Edmund asked Milady not to be upset, promising that in the future she would reach incredible heights in healing and would definitely cure Karen. Even though the heroine said okay, she wasn't going to give up on this idea, which means I need to make friends with the boy right now, so that when she finally fully mastered her healing abilities, he would trust her without a doubt. The next day, a very pleasant event occurred, and Sarah finally became a full-fledged Lady Bluewood. From today on, she was going to start seriously preparing for the role of the family heiress and took many books on various sciences from the library. Although her last name was returned to her, it was just a formality on paper for now, and Sarah wanted to work hard to become a real aristocrat. Looking at the girl's daily routine, the little girl was surprised. Because only 4 hours were allocated for sleep, the rest of the time was filled with lessons and reading books. Sarah was far behind other noble ladies who had received an education at the academy and probably didn't even know how to dance or ride, so she decided to prepare seriously. Surely the heroine wanted to make up for lost time, but the little girl was outraged because this was too tough a schedule. So she asked him to promise her that he would sleep at least 8 hours because she was incredibly worried about her. In a past life, just looking at this tiny, skinny girl would break my heart, but now, when I could finally eat and sleep well in peace, I had to take advantage of it. She saw dignity and aspiration in Sarah's eyes and decided not to lag behind her at all and to prepare together with her. But already in the first lesson, while Sarah was studying important information in the book, the young lady just sat on her lap and slowly fell asleep. The young miss woke up and realized that she had slept through the entire training, and her friend just smiled funny. Elodie turned out to be a so-so assistant, but today she had the most important goal, to meet Karen, although of course only she knew about this. All this time she sat on her lap and was even afraid that the girl was uncomfortable studying the information. But the lady admitted that everything is exactly the opposite, and as soon as you hug the girl, all the fatigue immediately disappears, strength appears, your head clears up, and your soul becomes calm. Perhaps this is the power of the family, to heal the body and soul with just its presence. If we remember about the magical clap, perhaps these were not groundless words, but now the little girl said that she wanted to take a walk and not interfere with the lady's studies. Having promised to return soon, she immediately ran out of the office because now she had much more important business. Sarah was doing her job and the young miss was going to do hers, even though she said she would be back very soon. But in fact, the little girl was not so sure of this because the road to Charon's palace was deserted, no people, no insects, and even the singing of birds could not be heard here. She found herself near an old building in which there were no cobwebs, no dried trees, no bushes. There weren't even any rats running around, there was absolutely nothing here, and this was definitely not a common disease. Most likely, this area became unsuitable for the life of other creatures, which is why there were no animals or green flowering plants here. There was no smell or any visible signs of decay either. It looked more like a reaction to poison than an infection. Elodie suggested that perhaps the toxic substances were leaking outside the castle, and they were colorless and odorless, so if you were circling around here without suspecting anything, you could easily end up dead. Charon probably had such a deadly poison, and now she was most worried about whether the Duke knew about it, but even if he did, he certainly couldn't control it. It could be compared to a plague in human form, which no one could overcome or resist. As the lady slowly walked inside the building, she decided to go upstairs because that was where some sounds were coming from. The door on the second floor was closed, but since there were no living creatures in the castle, closing the door was essentially pointless. The little heroine felt like a prince who had come to save a cursed princess, and opening the door she entered a room that was incredibly dark. A tightly closed place where no light penetrates, this house seemed to say that no one was welcome here. But the little girl knew that the comfort and peace that this dark space gave was incomparable to anything. After all, when she was a little mouse, darkness was the best shelter and safe place for her. Every darkness must have a light that will show the true path. It doesn't matter if it's Karen Valkyriesen or Karen Basilisk, you just have to not hide because it's not the right choice. So the lady opened the door of the room, opened the curtains, letting in the light, and shouted loudly where Karen was and whether he was all right. The boy had probably never opened the curtains here before and had been in complete darkness for a long time, but he clearly understood that someone had come to see him. Pale skin, tired eyes, incomprehensible abrasions and scratches on the face and hands indicated that something was clearly happening to the young man, but finally a light named Elodie Ratson knocked on his window.